What up, Doe? One Pride. This is the Roar of the Lions UK podcast, a podcast where one pride goes worldwide. It is Wednesday evening. My name is Anthony Fitzpatrick. I'm joined by Ryan McCluskey, which of course means one thing. This is the college football podcast. Lights, camera, MAC-tion. Right, we are 8 days away from the draft now, 8 short days. These months and months of reviewing players, mock drafts, all this is about to come to an end, and I think I'm just about ready for it too now.
Yeah, I've been a little bit exhausted. I'm kind of just ready for it to be here now. I've run out of steam, let's say, of all the preparation and all the information I've had to take in, so I'm ready for it to come now.
Yeah, absolutely. We've, especially on this show, we've been covering these prospects for a very long time now, and it's good to see sort of the end of the road in sight. We're going to get to see some of these great players go and do their thing in the NFL, and then we get a little bit break. Then we go and do it all over again next year. But we're going to do something a little bit different this evening. There is draft content all over the place at the moment, as we've said. So today we are devoting our show to the Mid-American Conference. We're going to do college football today, not all draft. We've got a guest coming on with us later, which is going to be really good. James, who's part of our Discord chat, he's going to come and talk to us about everything Mac. So you got any questions about it for him or for any of us too, then please do so. This is also going to be the finale of season 2 of our college football show. I can't believe, right, we've been doing this for 2 years already. But the second season is now just about in the books. We are going to have a little bit of a break when the draft is all said and done, and then we're going to be back in the summer doing all the conference previews, getting you set up and ready for the next college football season with season 3. So let's have a good time and enjoy it all this evening. And there are quite a few people in the building with us, so I just want to go through everyone who is in. First, Mike the Marine is in the Twitch chat. He says, "Howdy UK brothers, you're amazing. How old is..." Quick early question. How old's Hank? He's not that old, Hank, is he?
He was 3 about 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, so 3 years old. He's still young and feisty, bless him, and he's really happy because the weather's getting warmer. He doesn't like cold weather, does he, Rye? So the sun coming out is a bit of a nice change for him there. But thank you for joining us, Mike, as always. In the YouTube chat, well, we have had an unreal start this evening. Jeff Hurley has given us a $20 super chat. We really appreciate that, Jeff. Thank you ever so much. I mean, we're overwhelmed by all you guys and how you're backing us. So thank you very much. We love you all, and we really appreciate that. Jeff, if you've got anything you want to ask us this evening in the panel, you are more than welcome to with donos like that. We've got Bobby Lan in the chat. He says hello from Melbourne, Florida. Hope you're well, Bobo. Ken Stouder is in the building. Det Fanman is in the building. He goes, "I don't know why you guys are here, but I'm ready for some MAC-tion, aren't we all?" Giovanni Leons is in the building as well. Thank you all for joining, and like I say, if you have any questions, just put them in the chat there. Right, got to go through all the housekeeping first, just get that out the way while we wait for James to arrive. So, Roar Lions UK Discord, if you want in on that, let us know. We will send you a link and you can come and join in. Getting very feisty there at the minute. Lots of hot draft takes coming out, lots of discussion, debate. It's good fun, so please do come and join us there. The Roar Lions UK main podcast, we are back on Monday. We may have another episode this week, but that one is we're keeping under wraps at the moment, just waiting on some finalizations there. But it will be our last pre-draft show on Monday. We are just going to do sort of an open Q&A for the draft and anything else you want to talk about, really. So it's just going to be a nice lazy couple of hours for us there on Monday. Don't forget to like and sub to everything on Twitch and YouTube. Obviously you guys have taken us over 1,000 on YouTube. We just love you all, and we really do appreciate the backing. We're nearly up to 1,100 already, so the push is on. We're going to keep giving you just as good content as we do now. We're going to keep working hard so we can keep that number going up. Don't forget Lions Nation Unite as well, the app by Herman Moore, full of content creators, Lions content creators, just regular ordinary people making content for the fans. Please go and check that out if you do get the opportunity to. And I just want to quickly plug our draft extraordinaire. So in 8 days time it is draft time, and for the third year in a row with us here at Roar Lions UK, we're going to be streaming the entire draft over 3 days. So come and join us. We're going to have guests from all the 31 other teams, a lot of them British podcasters. We're going to pick their brains for information. We're going to have a good time, and some of your favourites from drafts in previous years will be back with us as well. I know there's a few guys I'm eager to talk to there, so do come and give us a check out. Obviously, it's a long weekend. We don't expect you to knock around for all of it, but if you want to drop in and say hi while the draft is on, then please do so. We put a lot of work into it, and we're really proud of the job we do. So let us crack on, and we are going to start off first with a little bit of news before we dive into all the Mac bits and while James gets himself set up. So Ryan, news. We were talking, anyone who's listened to this show for a while now, a couple of months ago I think it was, or might be a month ago, we were talking about possibly the new formation of another FBS conference, what will be the 11th if you don't count the independents as one of their own, which they're not really not. We said that might be a possibility on the horizon. Well, we are a little bit closer to that reality going forward. So we do have a new conference, but it's in the FCS at the moment. It's not at the FBS level. So the Western Athletic Conference and the Atlantic Sun Conference have combined to create what has been called the new United Athletic Conference. There will be 9 teams in this new conference, with a 10th to follow in 2025. So you've got Abilene Christian, Austin Peay, Central Arkansas, Eastern Kentucky, North Alabama, Southern Utah, Stephen F. Austin, Tarleton State, and Utah Tech. And then in 2025, Texas Tech, Rio Grande Valley are expected to join. The new league will be given 1 spot in the FCS playoffs, so that will go to the outright winner of the conference, so they've already got themselves a playoff berth. But the overall goal of the conference is to move up to the FBS sooner rather than later, so we're kind of at a halfway point with this new conference now. But Ryan, what do you make of the formation of the United Athletic Conference, and do you think there'll be a future for it in the FBS in upcoming years?
Not with those teams, no. Not with the majority of them. They are like middle of the road FCS sides. I say Austin Peay and that, they've got some talent there. They've had odd playoff experience in the last few years, but let's say Utah Tech, Tarleton State, like say there are some smaller schools. I don't think a good 50-60% of those schools could handle an FBS schedule. So I feel like that'd probably be a long way off. But as long as they get an automatic playoff berth, that's good. I'm guessing they've combined or merged because they've got a good TV deal or something where they can share out the funds more evenly. Otherwise, it wouldn't work for them. So clearly, creating this new kind of super conference works for them all individually. But yeah, it should be fun to see it. I'd say it's fairly well spread out as well, isn't it? And they're not just in one corner of the map, so there'd be quite a lot of travelling there. So it'd be interesting to see how the winner of that new conference, what kind of stead they stand themselves in for the playoffs. So let's see how those future champions do when they get into the first round.
Exactly. I think it's interesting they've got the playoff berth straight away. Obviously, there's only one, so maybe they'll get more in future. But like you said, there's a lot of teams not many people know about in there. So you might know about Stephen F. Austin. Obviously, BJ Thompson's getting a lot of hype for the draft at the minute. He's from there, so they're in the light. Austin Peay, I think they've scalped an FBS team in recent years. But for the most part, it is a lot of teams who've got a point to prove. But who knows? We may be getting that 11th conference, so we'll keep a very close eye on it. And obviously Ryan does his FCS bits for the show, so he will keep you up to date with what is going on in the new United Athletic Conference. Another bit of news regarding sort of, I'll just say, so Division 1, so potential student athletes, there's a new rule been in place. So if you were a student athlete, you were only allowed to take 5 official visits to schools before you made your commitment. That was what the rule used to be. That has now been changed, right? So anyone in Division 1, a potential student athlete wanting to decide where to go, where to commit, they now have unlimited official visits as to where they can go. They're not limited to 5 anymore. Seems a small thing on the surface of things, but I don't know what you make of this, because now smaller schools, I would think, or medium schools, if you're going against some of these big SEC sides trying to get recruits and they can only officially visit a few, they're going to them, they can come to you as well. I don't know, this seems like something that might benefit the smaller schools down the food chain if they can get athletes on site, really try and convince them that they're the school for them. What would you make of the rule change here?
It's difficult. Like the 4 and the 5 stars, it probably doesn't change anything. But if you're like a 0, 1, 2-star recruit, I reckon, that'll probably help smaller schools that will probably stand a fighting chance against some of the lower FBS sides and the top FCS sides. So, and like I say, if you're unsure as well, and you can have that 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th visit before you make the decision, hopefully you're able to make a better decision now, so you're not hitting the portal after your freshman year because you've been able to visit 10 schools and not 5, and you're not realise you've suddenly made a mistake and that you're not happy. So who knows, maybe we'll see less portal players after their first year because they've visited everywhere they wanted to do and they're happy with their first choice. If that does happen and you see those numbers decline of like freshmen or redshirt freshmen entering the portal, then it's definitely a good thing, because that's become a trend that's become too often, is newbies jumping ship after a year. So hopefully now they just cast more visits. If it's unlimited and you've got 14 offers all giving you a full ride scholarship, then you might as well visit all 14 schools. No point now not to use all of those visits.
No, like you get put up, you get a good deal with it at least. So yeah, I kind of like it. I think it's nice that every school will have an opportunity to try and get players in now, and maybe it won't just be shoehorned to the popular ones all the time. So we'll see what happens with it. Anyway, like you say, we might get an indication of how popular or how good it is by what happens in the portal in future years. So we will see with that. A little bit of other news. So big name from the NFL back down in college football, right? Cliff Kingsbury. Since we last did a show, he is now back in college football. He's a senior offensive analyst at USC. He is expected to work with the quarterbacks there, particularly one Caleb Williams, who's already getting the number 1 overall pick draft treatment next year, despite being a full season to play. I mean, it's an interesting one, this. You've already got Lincoln Riley there. Now you've got Cliff Kingsbury there. Now you've got, you got Caleb Williams in there. Is this a case like you feel like it might be a power struggle, too many cooks in the kitchen? Because their offense is already pretty good. It's the defense they need to sort out there. But what do you make of their decision to bring Kingsbury in to mentor Caleb?
I can understand it, because Cliff and Lincoln have both worked with the top 5 quarterbacks in the nation like the last 10 years. Individually, they've worked very well together. I feel like Cliff's role will be very limited. I feel like he will be a statistician, data, and probably just like limited to a quarterback coach. It won't surprise me if Caleb wins the Heisman or goes first overall, if he gets a huge bonus. I feel like that's probably what he's there to do. Try get Caleb to win the Heisman and delivering the first overall draft pick. So I reckon his contract will have clauses in it like that, where get some accolades, get some big money. He wasn't out of the game too long. Like I say, he said he was stepping away and that he was going to go do some travelling and all that. But the lure of college football, where he really belongs, was just too strong.
Yeah.
I can see USC dominating this year, if I'm honest. Last year, they flattered to deceive, but another year, and this could really be the year they make waves. And I think Cliff can probably help them do that. He's a great college quarterback coach, and he's a great offensive mind in the college game. I just don't feel like he was ready for the NFL. It was just too much to do and too much on his shoulders as a head coach of an NFL team. Some people, like Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, guys like that, they don't go to the NFL because they know their place is college football. That is Cliff Kingsbury. That's also Lincoln Riley as well. They just stay there their whole careers.
Yeah, agreed. But I do feel like this is a big season for Lincoln Riley, because you've got Caleb Williams. He's had his Heisman campaign. You're disappointed last year. If he can't win it again this year, at least win the Pac-12, let alone a playoff berth or anything like that, then with all the stuff with Oklahoma and never getting over the line there, having all this offensive talent but still not being able to do anything with it, I think that starts to raise questions about him if he can't do it next year. Now he's got Cliff with him as well. It's like Cliff's had, 3 Heisman winners at college level? Or 2? He's had quite a few, hasn't he, Cliff? So
Baker, Kyler, I think.
Yeah, Baker, Kyler, it was too late for... so I think it's 2 he's had. So you've got super weapons in that room now. At quarterback, at analyst, and at head coach. So he could have a Joe Burrow season if everything goes right. He could eclipse that record if everything goes right. So it's going to be an interesting to see there. But Cliff is back in college for the time being. Just a little bit of draft-related news now. So obviously, Pro Days just finished, Ryan, but there was an interesting piece that came out. I think it was a couple of weeks ago, but not done one of these for a little while. It's coming out that next year... So what happens with Pro Days at the minute? All schools do their Pro Days individually. I don't know if there's any set reason or rhyme with them, but schools just do them when they want within a defined time period. But next year, the Big 12, they have made the decision that they are going to have one giant Pro Day next season as opposed to all the schools doing it individually. So this is going to be every team in the Big 12 are going to get together at one location on one day, kind of like a mini combine like they have in Indy, and they're all going to do it at once. This interesting concept, I guess this one is, isn't it, right? I guess for teams, it feels like it could be a lot better for them, no having to send members of their staff in scouting teams out to 12 individual pro days. They can all go to one instead, and you can get to see more players in one go, I guess. But I don't know. What do you make of the decision for the Big 12 to do it all as one?
See, I understand in the sense of, like, if we look at the carbon footprint of, like, flying and traveling to 12 different pro days and then shipping all the equipment around, it's bad for the environment. Like you say, all the pro days are terrible for the planet. They're bad. They cost too much money as well. Hire the staff, the venues if you can't use your own field. It costs a lot of money. So putting them all together makes a ton of sense. I don't think you can do it in a day. I think it's going to have to be a weekend, like a day and a half, 2 days. Because if you're looking at, let's just say you've got 17 quarterbacks that are draft eligible over those, like, 12 teams, and they all have to go through drills, measurements, and throw. You can't do that in a day. All of them, it's impossible. Unless you're literally just going to have them do their drills and a few workouts. That's it, and then go for interviews. For the players themselves, they're going to get a lot less time. They're going to have to pick who they speak to much more carefully, especially if you're not invited to the combine. Because if you're fighting with 20 other running backs to get to speak to coaches, I think this is terrible for the players. But for the balance books, the sheets, the economy, and all that, it makes a lot more sense. And I actually think the Big 12 has started precedent. I give it a few years. I think you'll have all universal pro days over a weekend or like 2 or 3 days instead of like everyone going on different days. It don't really make sense anymore. Logistical as well. Flying, driving, booking plays, staying in hotels. It's crazy. The amount of money you must spend as a team sending your scouts all over the country in a 3-week period is astronomical. If you can send them all in one place or like to 6 places for a weekend, you'll save a fortune.
And your GM can go and get eyes on everybody as well, I guess, would be the big thing. The heavy hitters, instead of like hand-picking their pro days, then you get that. But I mean, Brian makes a point here. He goes, isn't the combine there because they wanted to eliminate all the scouts to each college to scout players and bring them all to Indy? That's why it's called the combine. I mean, I guess if this happens and, like you said, it's going to be over a couple of days, because it's kind of got to be, because 12 players, 12 teams, draft prospects. I mean, I guess if the conference is smaller, but they're all double-digit teams pretty much. You're going to have to do it over several days, and then if all the other conferences follow suit, you're going to kind of end up with 10 mini combines, really, aren't you, where they're going to be spread out over 2 or 3 days, and I don't know, it just feels like that might cause issues as well.
Yeah, mega combine. I think that's the alternative, actually. How many players got the combine now? Like 315, I think it is.
Yeah.
Right, let's up that to 500. And if you're injured or you do badly at the combine, then you have your pro day. So if you do well at the combine, you don't go to your pro day. Or if you do everything at the combine, you don't go to your pro day. I think it's time to increase the combine, because that's 4 days.
Yeah.
So let's double the players at the combine, make it a whole week, and then pro days are like for those that did terrible
Or are injured.
Yeah.
You know.
Maybe they should be more reserved for those special cases. If you do everything at the pro day, that you did everything at the combine, you're not really achieving that much.
No, so I guess the way I'd look at it, maybe you could do what you do, like with Senior and Shrine Bowl. So Senior Bowl, it's all like the big draft prospects want to go there. The Shrine Bowl, it's kind of the more out there draft prospects, maybe the day 3 UDFA guys. Just do that big mega combine of who you think are like the best 400 players in the draft, and then do a smaller, like a smaller little brother to it where everybody else can go and do it. So then you've got 2 events. So you've got all the big ones, and then you've got all the UDFA guys who can go and do theirs. And then you hold a third one mid-April for all those guys who are injured. Because there are quite a few this year, actually, and not all the pro days are done yet. So you kind of have a mid-April one, so anyone who misses out for injury or for whatever reason, personal reasons, whatever, still gets an opportunity to do it. Then you've got 3 blocks of days, and that's it. 3 events, and then, no having to mess around. So, yeah, I think it's interesting, but if all 10 conferences do it, I feel like it eliminates the combine then. Because if you're going to do it over time, then don't put them through it twice over several days, but I don't know. It's an interesting concept and something we'll have to look on going forward. So the Big 12 is doing all its teams, all pro days at the same location next year. Let's see how that one goes. I think that was about everything. Just a few interesting pro days I want to quickly go through before the lines were at, the ones where not really many teams went, and kind of just interested to see what they were doing there. But there's a few, and there's a pattern here as to where they've been going, right? So Lions went to the Grand Valley State Pro Day. Obviously, that's for Quinton Barrow, the ginormous offensive tackle from there. Lions went to watch Air Force. 10 teams went to watch them there. And obviously, you've got Brad Roberts, the halfback, who we've really been big on for a while. And then you've got Kyle Patterson, the tight end there. He's huge. And obviously, tight end coming from a blocking system from the triple option, which James, when he gets in here, will tell you all about. He absolutely loves the triple option and how that's played. But I don't know. I fancy seeing one of those Air Force guys, maybe not drafted here, but I fancy seeing them on the practice squad, one of those two, because I think both of them could, over the long term, be a good player in the NFL.
Yeah, they've both shown that they're able to be physical and also carry a large workload over a lot of snaps. Between them, they've got a lot of snaps. Even the quarterback, Zeke Daniels, like I say, he may intrigue someone as a UDFA. And with the rule change, like Andre Carter getting the rule change this year, to make it easier for like servicemen and military academies, like make it pro. I feel like now we'll start a trend where more scouts and that will attend military pro days because they realise it's going to be easier to actually get them to be able to play in the NFL. Then that's probably more thing. But yeah, I imagine we're probably looking more at the tight end now, Brad Roberts. Like I said, Brad Roberts is a good running back, but he's a Craig Reynolds, he's that kind of guy. Like I said, he's got lots of mileage on the clock. Like I say, he's taken like 1,200 something carries, ridiculous, a lot of wear and tear, but very serviceable. But yeah, I feel like a tight end and a triple option fits the Lions because primarily they need you to be an inline blocker first. If you can do that, then everything else is just a bonus. And when you go with so much heavy running and tight bunch formations, you're always blocking. You're always.
Yeah. I fully expect that. I would not be surprised to see his name on our UDFA list when this is all said and done. Kyle Patterson, and he's sneakily good as a receiver as well. Zeke Daniels throws it a little bit. I've seen him make some cracking catches, but I think there's legitimate interest from the Lions at Air Force there. They were also, and we'll talk about this later because these are MAC sides, but they were one of 10 teams to go to Ohio, and I think one of similar number to go to Ball State as well. There are a couple of very intriguing prospects there, which we'll ask James about. They're also at Temple, one of 13 teams to go there. That's Isaac Moore, the big offensive tackle there. So they're looking very big at offensive tackles late in this draft. I think there'll be quite a few UDFAs or late round picks that are going to be offensive tackles for us, looking for the next guy to develop there. And then the other one I was really interested by, they went to Arkansas State as well, one of about 10 teams. And when we did the preview for the Sun Belt last summer, Kevon Bennett, their linebacker, was the guy that we pointed out there, and he's had a hell of a good season. He's older prospect, he's about 24, but he kind of fits exactly the mold of what we like at a linebacker, so I wouldn't be surprised if he's on our list of UDFAs either. So a few names to look out for there, and the MAC guys, well, we're going to talk about them now. I don't know if you're there, James. If you want to pop on in. If you're not, then... No, I think he's here.
I do believe I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you very well, James. How are you doing?
Wonderful. Doing just fine. I was going through a bunch of my notes, and yes, indeed, Carson Steele no longer at Ball State. He transferred over to UCLA. This offseason, he was one of their big gets. They also got Colin Schlee, the Kent State quarterback who succeeded Dustin Crum. UCLA did. So we'll be talking about that later when it comes to new things in the MAC going on. But yeah, KC's in a bit of trouble there. Ball State will also be going through some rebuilding. But yeah, it was an interesting season this year in the MAC. It'll be interesting next year in the MAC. And, when it comes to the draft, there's a lot of prospects that, you might know, you might not know, but are worth keeping your eye on anyway.
No, absolutely. It's fun, the back is a minute. So just to introduce James to the audience. So James is part of our Discord chat. He's been in there for a long time, and also a writer for Hustle Belt, which is a website dedicated to all things MAC. So James, thank you very much for joining us this evening. As I said, if you want to just mention a little bit about Hustle Belt, what it is, what you do there to start off, just kind of introduce yourself to everybody.
All right, well, Hustle Belt is SB Nation's first, only, and best Mid-American Conference blog. We've been around since, when did Matt find the website? Probably about 2010. 2011, I'd want to say. I joined the site personally in 2014, initially as a central beat writer. My beat was exclusively doing football, gamers, previews, depth charts, things of that nature. Probably about 2 or 3 years after that, ended up becoming a assistant editor, I guess manager of the site, kind of like Jeremy Reisman over at Pride Detroit, kind of that role, and that's where I've been since. So I've been doing a lot of content schedules. Lately my focus has been over on the pro side doing draft content, which is part of why I'm here now. But you'll still catch me occasionally doing some game recaps, especially when November comes around, or in the non-conference season when there's 12 games a weekend and we all have to go out and do that kind of stuff. But the MAC really did solidify my love of football, and this is kind of my way of giving it back.
Absolutely, and one of the favourite parts of the college year, obviously, is midweek MAC-tion later on in the year. Everyone, get some corking games going on earlier in the week there. So, where do your loyalties lie within the MAC then? Do you have a team in there? Because I know we have a lot of people in our chat who, obviously, a lot of people based from around Michigan, Detroit. I can see Ken's in there. He goes, I'm an Eastern Michigan local there. So, where does your loyalty lie when it comes to the MAC?
I'm a Central Michigan graduate. Fire up chips, baby. I actually wrote an article about this on Hustle Belt somewhere. For the longest time, I did not want to go to Central. Everybody from my hometown was just, if they went to college, half of them were going to Central, and then half of them were dropping out within a year. And, I don't want to go there. I want to go somewhere else. I had applied to, South Carolina, Notre Dame, Tulane. I think Boise State was in there at some point. And then, some circumstances worked themselves out. I ended up getting a really good scholarship and went on down to Central. It was the best decision I could have possibly made. I loved every moment that I had there. You could identify me when I was a student, to say the least. I was always leading the student section at the basketball and football games in some fairly rowdy attire. Just a very distinct voice, we'll put it that way. I guess my my claims to fame in terms of seeing NFL production. I saw Corey Davis when he was in college. He played over at Western. He was a top 5 pick in the 2016 draft. He was the brother of Titus, who was on our football team at around the same time. And then I got to see Cooper Rush's debut at quarterback for Central. It was a game against New Hampshire, and I want to say 2012. He came in as an injury replacement because our first starter got injured in the game against Michigan. So we were down to our second starter, who I believe was Alex Nisnak, a transfer, I want to say, from Cincinnati. He'd either gotten injured or benched for performance, because we were down, I think, 14 points to New Hampshire. And if you know your football, New Hampshire is very good at the FCS. And not only did he lead the comeback effort, he ended up winning the game. He threw like 3 touchdowns and for a whole bunch of yards, and it was in the pouring rain. Everybody was miserable, and all of a sudden, here comes this redshirt freshman quarterback from, Lansing Catholic, and he never relinquished that spot for 4 years. I've always had a unhealthy obsession with Cooper Rush because of that moment. Just a truly glorious, CNU history thing happening there. But yeah, that's where my loyalties lie. Central Michigan. They gave some love to me and my family, and so I figured the best way I can repay that is to be as staunch of an advocate for the Chippewas as possible.
No, absolutely, and you do a lot of writing for Hustle Belt as well, don't you? I've read quite a lot of the articles, and like I say, you cover them really well. I've learned a lot through that. But so is Cooper Rush the favourite player that you've had? Then obviously we've been there. Is there anyone else who stands out, even if they didn't make it in the NFL level?
I don't know how long you folks been following football at all overseas, but rest his soul. Zerlon Tipton was a running back for the Cooper Rush, not the Cooper Rush ones, but I think half of the Ryan Radcliffe CNU teams, and then I think for the first couple of years of Cooper Rush, he was a running back with those teams. Just a really impressive power back who latched on with the Indianapolis Colts, I think, as a UDFA, and had some really productive years for them on special teams and a rotation running back. I really enjoyed watching him and being able to talk to him early on in my CMU media career. Khalil Pimpleton, I think you guys are familiar with him.
Absolutely.
I've had several great conversations with him as a member of the media, and I personally loved watching him on the field. I was a photographer in the 2019 season. I had the media credential, and being on field to see that speed in real time was frankly amazing. He's a genuinely impressive individual, with his football performances, with just his sparkling personality. What you saw on Hard Knocks was really the Khalil that I had grown to know, in media sessions and seeing him in person. So that's another really lovely favorite of mine. Tommy Lazzaro, he was our Wildcat quarterback in the 2019 championship season, and he was also one of our starting quarterbacks in the ill-fated 2018 season. I really love just true scrappy backup quarterbacks who can run, and that was Tommy Lazzaro to a T. Let's see, Joe Ostman. You probably don't know who Joe Ostman is. He is a St. Ignace native. He's a Youper. He played, I want to say, rush right end for the Chippewas in the mid-2010s. Latched on, I think, with the Philadelphia Eagles practice squad and was in their rotation for a little bit there. Kayvon Frazier, another favorite. He just retired, I think, this year. He signed on with the Dallas Cowboys coming out of Central, played strong safety. He was the one who actually recruited Cooper Rush to Dallas the year that Cooper Rush was eligible for the draft, because they were really good friends. And he had a nice, productive career on special teams with the Cowboys. I think he was with the Bengals and the Dolphins, and maybe one other team is in that rotation. God, the more I think about it, the more players just start popping up here. You can tell this is my pride and joy, is enjoying Chippewa football, because I didn't really start watching football until I got into college. Like, the Detroit Lions are my first team.
Yeah.
Like, because, I had moved up to Michigan. I'm not native to here, like, when I was a child. And so, I didn't learn about football, like, as a sport in general until 2007, which is that really crazy college football year. Because Dan Lefevre, was making a name for himself that season. He was another former quarterback at Central. Him and Antonio Brown and Brian Anderson, I want to say, were just scourging people regularly that year. And then I was like, well, that was kind of fun and kind of cool. That was also the year that App State upset Michigan. I thought that was kind of cool, even though all my friends were really mad. I would have been like a freshman in high school at this time. And so I was like, oh, well, I'll watch football. I'm going to watch the Detroit Lions because my friend, one of my best friends in high school was really into the Detroit Lions, like season ticket holder and everything. And it was, of course, the perfect season. And I figured at that point I'd watched all 16 games and, I'd finally found a place to call home after years and years of moving around and can't get any worse than this. So, yeah. So I ended up latching on to Lions from there. And then, when I got to college, I figured, when I get to college and I get to that college, I'm going to cheer for whoever football team I end up going to, and that ended up being Central. And so, like, that's really where I got my education in football, was covering the Chippewas as a reporter and, watching the Lions as a fan. This writing job has given so much to me in that respect. And it's why I enjoy writing about it. It's because, like, it's a true, like, a true learned passion for me.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why we like talking to people like this, is because we get to learn all this stuff about these teams. There's that many college teams around. It's nice to know, it's nice to hear from people who are completely integrated into it and know so much about it. There is CMU representation around here as well. Mike in our Twitch chat goes, go Chips, went there 1983 to 1984. Derek in the YouTube chat says, my nephew played against Cooper, Charlotte versus Lansing Catholic, so Derek's nephew's going to have a claim to fame there. Also mentions how Central Michigan had a lot of O-line talent taken in the draft about 10 years ago.
Oh,
he says Eric something.
Eric Fisher, my mutual Facebook friend, Eric Fisher.
There you go. That's like
about that.
A top of. You've got more number one overall picks than Alabama, don't you? Isn't that's the?
There is one year. There is. I think this is a stat. Like, CMU is the only school, I think, to have a number one overall pick in the NFL draft and the CFL draft. Like, maybe in the same year, or like maybe in general. But they had a receiver named Mark Chapman who was signed first overall by the Hamilton Tiger Cats. Go Ticats. He never played it down, but he was drafted, so technically that still counts for something. And then, of course, Eric Fisher went first overall in that really strange 2013, I think it was 2013 draft?
Yeah.
Where it was between him and Luke Jokel for that first tackle spot. And I remember his ascent up the board, because I think he started like as a mid-round intrigue kind of guy, and then I think by the time the bowl games came around, I remember this because I went to that bowl game, the Little Caesars Bowl, against Western Kentucky. He had already risen to the mid-first, and then he really showed out at the combine, and he just shot right up after that, like into the top 5. And the day of, I remember this because I was on campus. We come back from holiday break at that point. The rumor came down, I don't remember which reporter reported it first, that Fisher was going to go first overall. Like, it was basically already a done deal. And the campus went wild. Like, he hadn't even drafted yet. Like, just the rumor had come out. But, like, I lived on North Campus. And I know there's probably a few Central guys and gals in here who are listening. And it's like, oh, I know where that is. I used to be in Larzalier Hall. I was a big old dork who lived in Larzalier Hall. But when you're on North Campus, you're basically bordering Fraternity Row, which I think is called Main Street, Mount Pleasant. That place was on fire. Literal fire. Within a couple hours, just, people throwing the couches out there and hooping and hollering and all that. It got a little dangerous. I think we had to bunker down like in the late hours as the SWAT teams came out with the smoke bombs and all that. But we were all having a great time. We all really enjoyed that Eric Fisher went first overall.
I was surprised one there. Have you got anything CMU related, Bri, or just should we crack on?
Not that I can think of, no.
All right, so let's go on to the MAC a bit more at large now. So we'll take a look back to the 2022 season first. So last summer we did our sort of MAC preview for the show, and I actually went back and read and listened to a lot of it, and the MAC was a very fun conference this year, I think it's safe to say, James. Teams were beating teams all over the place. There was really no sort of hierarchy around at all, and our predictions that we had for this, so because at the end of every show we did predictions for what the bowl game was going to be, for the championship game. Ryan had picked Northern Illinois over Miami, Ohio, and I picked Kent State over Northern Illinois, and Northern Illinois went from the top to the absolute bottom, and this was despite us saying during the show, like, they won so many games by one score the year before. They were living on a tightrope, but we kind of both believe in them. But they crashed and burned. What was the obviously you've watched all the 2022 season with James. What sort of overall did you make of the MAC season last year? It was carnage in some areas, wasn't it?
It certainly was. And to be transparent, I believe I had the matchup last year being a rematch of 2019, which was Central and Michigan. Or Central and Michigan. Central and Miami, rather. I had, not just myself, but a bunch of people on staff had confidence that Lou Nichols was going to show up again. Danny Richardson would play to his second half value that he had in the season prior, and that, you just kind of had like trust and faith in Jim McElwain to be able to push that forward, that momentum. So it was a bit of a surprise to see Central Michigan just kind of flounder around, and I guess we could talk about that a little bit later. But in terms of the rest of the season, like, I think we kind of gathered in media circles that it was going to be a season very similar to, say, 2017, which was coincidentally another year that Toledo won the MAC title in basically runaway fashion. It was just a very top-heavy group this year, lots of parity in the middle, and then like a true rebuilder down at the bottom. Like, that's how we felt it was going to filter out. It was just a matter of which team do you think was coming out of the West? Because generally in a lot of years, Toledo is a bit of an underperformer. This is going back to the Matt Campbell years for you for Iowa State. They had managed to win just like I think 2 MAC titles in like 12 years or something like that, because they just, for whatever reason, couldn't get over the hump. And so there was a little bit of this skepticism that they were going to be able to do that this year, despite the overwhelming talent that they had. And, then you had to factor in, Northern Illinois is here. They found a way to do it all year last year. They're going to find a way to do it all again this year, somehow, some way. That's kind of how we looked at it in the preseason. But what we failed to recognize, I think, besides the fact that they were winning all these games by one score, was that they were really young last season. And, you're bound to have a slump. Like, teams figure you out after a while. I think this will ultimately happen to NIU. Teams figured them out. They started getting injuries at key positions. They rotated through, I think, 4 quarterbacks this year. And, that's how they ended up being down there. Toledo, they had a really soft out-of-conference slate. Outside of that, I think they played Ohio State this year. Let's say.
Yeah, I believe they did.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it was. They showed up pretty well against, as well as they could reasonably against that Ohio State team, and then they had a really struggle showing against San Diego State, and you started to wonder, like, man, I'm not sure this team's made of that like strong fiber that we expected them to be. But then they showed out in the MAC season. They won the games they needed to really early before other teams started to ascend in the West. So, like, Eastern had a really late ascension, for instance. Ball State was kind of wishy-washy. Western was an underperformer, a vast underperformer this year, as was Central. And so they were just able to wrap that up really early, and were able to start focusing on whoever came out of the East. The East, very similarly, was a conference that we didn't really have a lot of certainty in. I think there was a lot of variety in terms of who was going to top that. Miami was favored because they just tend to find a way. They're going to finish 7-5, 5-7, 6-6. They're always going to be there, at the top. That's just how that conference generally tends to be. I think Kent State was another team that a lot of people put up there. They assumed that Sean Lewis was going to be able to kind of plug and play Colin Schlee and all that talent and make that run once again. Because there's a little bit of that, that was NIU Devil Magic. NIU always manages to do this. It's not any fault of Kent's type of deal. And so you look at Kent, and it's largely the same roster on paper. You have the same coaching staff. They should be the favorites. And just for whatever reason, it didn't materialize. It was just one of those years where they made mistakes they didn't normally make in the season before. They were really disjointed. Lots and lots of 3-and-outs, lots more than the prior year, that allowed teams to kind of get back into it against them. They just for whatever reason didn't quite play up to par in 2022. So that allowed an opening from Ohio, which was not expected at all. They had gone, I think, 3-9. The prior year was a really big struggle with Tim Albin in his first season as a head coach. I think at any level since maybe the JUCO or Division II. It had been basically 2 decades since he'd been head coach. And so it felt like last year was a lot of that transition where it's okay, we have to transition to a new coach, despite it being the same system, so he's going to make some mistakes. But there was a moment, I think it was in week 4, the coaches got together and realized that whatever systems they were running weren't fitting their personnel. Because they had ported over some of the previous playbooks from Frank Solich when he retired. And they realized some of these concepts aren't working, so we're going to turn them around. I think they were playing a lot of zone defense, especially in those first 4 weeks, and they switched to a lot of man, for instance. And after that, something worked. Because the offense was working just fine. Curtis Rourke looks just like his brother, if not better than his brother, Nathan, at this point. And he was on track to, set more records than he already has at Ohio prior to his injury. And I think if he'd have been healthy for that MAC title game, they would have won that game against Toledo. Personally, that's just kind of how I feel about it. Even though Toledo's defense was ultimately what won them their championship, and we will talk about that when we get into, I guess, draft prospects for this season. Just the sheer number of draft prospects they had on the defensive side.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just one of those years this year where you had a team that everybody felt was going to be dominant in Toledo, up at the top. And then in the East, just as it is every year, it's a slobber knocker of a division, and whoever comes out on top is going to be basically fodder to whoever is out in the West. But Ohio held their own in that MAC title game. They just weren't able to get that last score when they really needed it. So all in all, it was a very interesting season. Transfer talent ended up being a huge decider in a number of contests. Toledo largely won homegrown. A lot of their prospects were homegrown. But there were teams in, especially the East, who showed that you could pull in a bunch of transfers, through the portal, whether it's, from last year or this year, and be able to compete right away. Buffalo did this especially well. I think at their pro day they had 7 guys alone who came in from other places. BGSU also somehow, some way, I still don't understand how that happened, finished 6-6 in the regular season, and a lot of it was due to guys they were able to pull in from other places as well. So you're seeing an interesting blend of roster building philosophies in the MAC that is still going to take some time to really figure out in terms of who's doing it right and who's doing it wrong. But I think last year was the first year we really saw that start to come into fruition. I think that'll port over into this season.
Yeah, like you said, I think it's a lot of teams who are finding themselves and the identities there. I was with you on Bowling Green. I saw them when they lost that 120-point shootout against Eastern Kentucky. I thought, right, yeah, they're screwed this year, and that was at home as well, and they threw that one away. But we can talk about the championship game first, then we can talk about the teams in general. So, Rye, I'll go to you first. Obviously, Toledo. We mentioned it last year. They kind of the team that always have disappointed a little bit, and we didn't know if they could do it. And they were in the tougher of the two conferences. I think they went 5-3 overall in the West, and then you had Ohio. So they were ranked 4th, I think, in the preseason poll in that division. So they were nowhere to be seen. I think they got mullered by Penn State and Iowa State on the out-of-conference schedule early on. There was about a 110-point game against Fordham, which they only just won. And then they lost their only conference game to Kent State first on. They ended up making the final and making a good game of it. I mean, what did you think of the final in the end? And the two teams that got there, were you surprised those two were there? And what did you make of the final?
As James has mentioned, I was a huge fan of Curtis Rock as well. He looked like a mini version of his brother. And I watch a lot of CFL, so I know Nathan very well, and I saw lots of traits that his brother could be better than him. I remember when we did the final preview, and I remember saying, I can't believe the starting quarterback is out of the title game. Like I said, just 2 days before, and he's been ruled out for the season. I thought that is what turned the momentum. But this was a huge season for injuries. Like I say, when NIU lost the Rat, their leading rushing, Ratkovich, that was one of the stars. It slowed down a lot of offenses. A lot of offenses struggled, especially in the MAC this year. So, in the end, two teams scraped over the line almost. Did just enough to get there in state and in schedule. Out of schedule, took some shellackings where they had to, but did what they had to. The title game could have been better if both teams had had full complements. But I think in the end, Toledo, their defense was just so stingy, and someone coming in as well, stepping in Curtis Rock's shoes, it was never going to be easy to try and command an offense that wasn't yours and come up against such a stout team. So I wasn't surprised in the end with actually what happened. So yeah, I think the final probably went as scheduled as it would have gone.
Right, all credit to Vince Karras, the defensive coordinator over at Toledo. He made his name as head coach over at Mount Union, which is a D3 powerhouse. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Purple Raiders at all over there, but that was his calling card there. Jason Candle, when his job was on the line, he was going to be fired in 2019, realized he needed to shuffle up his staff. The first person he called up was Vince Karras, and he convinced him to come up as the defensive coordinator, and you could see that steady change in their defensive performance from there, because prior to his arrival, Toledo had this reputation of being the run and gun team that can play on offense, and then they just kind of allow points on defense. And so that hire there was very vital to Toledo's current successes.
Yeah, and what did you make of the final itself, James? Was it, obviously, I think, like Ryan said, when Curtis Rock was out, you knew it was going to be very difficult for Ohio to win it, but he said they showed up admirably. It's a shame they didn't have him, because they could well have won it with him.
Right. It's interesting to look at that championship game in the context of the teams' performances coming up to that point. I had mentioned earlier that Toledo clinched their division really early. I think they clinched it right at the start of the weeknight season, so they had 3 or 4 weeks really to prepare for that title game, and you could tell that it took away a little bit from their on-field performance. I know they had to go through, I think, games where they missed Dequan Finn for injury for a little bit, and so they end up with some really head-scratching performances and losses there down the stretch that made them feel a little vulnerable compared to Ohio, who is just alley-ooping and slam dunking all over any team that faced their way, prior to Rourke's injury. And then, I'm trying to remember his name. I think it's CJ Harris, who came in and took over, and he wasn't supposed to play this season. It was supposed to be Parker Navarro But Parker Navarro got injured in the non-conference season in garbage time duty, and so suddenly you had your third-string redshirt freshman, coming in and trying to win the division, essentially, for Ohio, because they did not win that division until the last week, because it was Ohio. I think Buffalo was still in the mix because they had that delayed game against Kent State due to, I think, a blizzard in the Buffalo area.
That was bad.
And then-
Yeah.
Yeah, and then Bowling Green was also still in that mix and needed some results to go their way. So, Ohio clawed and scratched their way up there with all that momentum, despite all these losses that they had suffered. And so you felt like, you know what? Maybe this is finally the year. Ohio has famously not won the Mid-American Conference since the 1960s, to say the least.
Wow.
Even though they've been in the championship game several times since then. So it's just one of those, like, it's got to be the year. It's got to be the year. It's against Toledo. They've looked kind of vulnerable. They've underperformed. It's Toledo. You don't believe Toledo till they prove it to you. And ultimately, Toledo proved it. In that championship game. They were never in any serious doubt in terms of the result there. They just out-talented Ohio in an environment where talent ultimately tends to win out.
Yeah, exactly. So, obviously, Toledo, they win the MAC this year. So, we'll talk about some of the teams and how they did first, and maybe chat about some of the players and how they did. But there were some, in terms of positives for teams last year, there is a team who is on the ascent at this moment in time, a team that has traditionally done really badly, but they have found the right coach. He has been taking them to bowl games year on year, and he took them up to 9 wins this year. He's in state, not far from you. We're obviously talking about Eastern Michigan, the Eagles. I mean, people keep doubting that because it is one of the hardest places to go and win in football. We know that, but he seems to have found a recipe to win there. Do you think that the Max may be on the menu for them next year, the way they're going? What is it he's doing there that's turned them around so quickly?
Chris Creighton has been one of those guys that I've covered basically my entire career. I remember the guy prior to him, Ron English, when he got fired and having to look up all these candidates for who could ultimately replace him. And when they came back with Chris Creighton, I think Heather Like was the athletic director at the time. She's over at Pittsburgh now. She came back with Chris Creighton, and you're like, huh? You're not really sure how to feel about this guy. And it helped that in that environment, Eastern Michigan was considering dropping football, or at least a conversation was starting to be had. Fans were extremely hostile to the program at that point, to the point where the board was seriously looking into it, and this institution had, some financial troubles. And so when you come back with a D2 hire whose primary, pipelines are in the plains, in Oklahoma, Kansas, places of that nature, you're like, well, how is that going to work up here? And then you get to his first press conference, and he's talking about, doesn't matter where we are, whether it's a grass field or a turf field, or if we're going to have to fight you in a glass-covered parking lot. Doesn't that sound familiar?
Very much.
Who is this guy? I don't understand this guy. And the first couple seasons were really rough, which it usually is when you're transitioning at a program that low. But then even in those first that third and fourth seasons where those players are starting to come in and they're getting really thorny, and you're like, huh, they've got some really thorny guys over here. They're kind of annoying. They were finding ways to upset Big Ten teams all the time. I think their streak is still intact as far as that is concerned. I think they've got 4 or 5 straight at this point since they've had Creighton as a head coach against Big Ten teams. But you could see clearly that they're establishing a culture there. They love working at the factory. They're putting in shifts. all the time. First in, last out, things of that nature. And over time, I grew to understand what he was going for. He realized that there is a pipeline for a certain build and mold of player who's under-recruited by other schools that he could take advantage of that no one else in the MAC was taking advantage of. And so he has a very specific idea of player that he wants at his school, and he goes out and gets them. So he's not always going against a lot of, Central and Western. Well, Central and Western are constantly in each other's territories. And they've also largely won Detroit as well, just because Eastern has been really woeful for decades, and some of the bigger talent will go to Michigan or Michigan State ultimately, and so Eastern is like choice number 5. Or actually, in some years, they might even be choices 6 or 7 behind like a Ferris State or a Grand Valley. And so, at least in the first couple of years, he just relied largely on like the pipelines that he had established in D2, and like trying to find guys like in the JUCO paths as well. He was really successful with that early on in his career, and now he's starting to get around to being able to start recruiting more locally in that Detroit area. I know Hassan Beydoun was a walk-on for that program, wide receiver. He was from the very famous Dearborn High School program over there, and he worked his way from special teams walk-on to a starter scholarship player. So yeah, it's just, he is a true culture builder, and he is a guy who loves and understands football at a level that is vital in the group of 5. Because you'll get a lot of guys who come into the group of 5 who see it as a stepping stone into a larger job. Conversely, you'll also get a lot of guys in the group of 5 who come down from a Power 5 job and are like, oh, well, I have to, this is where I have to rebuild myself, or something like that. That's never really been Chris Creighton's thing. He likes to come in somewhere, build deep roots, and make sure that that program is left in a better place than when he got there. At this point, he's probably not going to be on the list for a lot of other places. There was rumors of him like going to Rutgers or going to Kansas, a couple of years back. But I think, at his age, I think he will be very content to become the next Frank Solich and just establish himself in Eastern and put the MAC on notice. And they will put the MAC on notice this year. I'm putting it out there. Like, a lot of the MAC West is on a downtrend. Their only other real healthy competition at the moment is Toledo, who they almost beat this year. Like, if Eastern beat Toledo, I think that was a 1-score game.
3 points.
They're in the MAC championship. So it's just one of those things where it's like they're right there. They're knocking on the door. They just need a result or two to go their way, and that's something I never thought that I would see. In terms of the Michimac.
No, exactly. Yeah, exactly. They're the ones who've been forgotten about. It's funny you mentioned about the local recruiting. Derek in the YouTube chat, he goes, the EMU pulls a lot of kids from the Detroit area. Lots of kids from Inkster have played at EMU. So
Inkster.
Yeah.
I admit, I'm a Northern Michigan kid. Detroit, in like its metro area and suburbs, I still don't quite understand all the way. So I might miss some Detroit area kids if they're from a suburb, and that is apologies.
No. I think he's just adding. He's adding to it, not correcting. I think he's just adding. The lot been there. So no, appreciate that, Derek. Ryan, James. I think but Ryan is an Arizona State fan, a big one. I know. I'm sorry, Ryan. This is kind of leading into it here, but we're talking about Eastern. They came over to your place and beat you this season. Big upset.
It was the greatest game that no one ever saw.
No, Ryan did. I was just about to ask, Ryan. I don't mean to bring up, but just in terms of what you saw from the team and now yourself, what impressed you about them in the victory over you this year? Because it was still a big statement win. Even if Arizona State, they're going through a bit of a build at the minute, but still a big win. What did you see from them that you really liked?
Well, they had a breakout player this year. Samson Evans, their running back, had a phenomenal year, and he gashed us. He had I think nearly 200 yards on the ground alone. and he just destroyed us. That offensive line just kept everyone at bay. Could not get to the QB. Used the tight end as well really well. They had a good pair of tight ends that were good across the middle of the field. So their offense was really good. We turned the ball over as well. They got takeaways. Yeah, they came into Sun Devil and they left with a comprehensive win. We were soundly beaten. We were never in that game. And Samson Evans, I actually saw a few of the games all year. He was fantastic all year. He had well over 1,000 yards on the year, and he was probably the lifeline of that entire offense.
Yeah, Samson's a wild guy. It feels like he's been at Eastern forever, but he's only been there since 2020, which is wild to me. Chris Creighton was able to get him through the transfer portal. He was originally committed to Iowa. So just imagine him being in Iowa behind that offensive line and all that. But he's really their do-it-all back. He plays a very north-south style that I enjoy. I am a big fan of north-south runners, for sure. And he even has some Wildcat quarterback in there. And unbelievably, he is back. He will be back this season for Eastern. He's listed on the roster.
I was about to say, are they... Because I don't know too much of the ins and outs of it, but are they returning quite a few of their guys next year? Because I'm full in on the belief that they can make a run at the MAC next year, providing there's not massive turnover.
There's been a little bit of turnover. I don't have the players specifically in front of me, but I would love to shout out our House of Ball contributor, Zachary Vanuenzi. I think I'm saying that right. Twitter user at TheEvanzee. He's really good at tracking Eastern Michigan specifically, and they have had some turnover in their depth ranks. But by a lot of the contributors from last season, especially on offense, should be back this season. And they have enough belief in what they currently have, and they've been really good at getting transfer portal players lately. I think one of their leading tacklers last year, Joe Sparacchio, was from Boston College. So I have faith that they'll be able to put up similar numbers.
Do you think they'll be able to make a run at the MAC?
Absolutely. Like I said earlier, their only real competition right now in the West is Toledo. Western is in a rebuilding phase at the moment. They have a new head coach there who they got from Louisville. Their former offensive coordinator, Lance Taylor. It'll be his first head coaching gig. He's going to have to, take the lumps of that roster, especially with a lot of its former NFL talent now gone. So they're kind of a question mark. Ball State is in a similar position. They're in a perpetual 6-6 cycle. They got to figure out a few things with that roster. They're going to suffer some big defensive losses, and they've suffered the loss of Carson Steele, obviously. Although they did get Marquez Walker from Kent State, which is going to be a big deal for them in the running game. And then Central, we don't know what we got in Central. Honestly, that was a team who was expected to be in the hunt for the MAC West this season, and they end up being 4-8 this year. There's uncertainty around their quarterback position at the moment. Basically, that whole offense is a work in progress. Defense will probably be okay there, but in terms of Eastern and the MAC, Toledo's going to be their main competition this year, and then in the East, you're probably looking at Ohio. Ohio's going to be up there. Miami might be up there again because 6-6, 7-5, but they're always good in league play. They just play that Northwestern style of offense defense that bores you to sleep, but is successful for some reason. But yeah, they've got a real chance. I'd say they're about third or fourth on the table.
Yeah, I'll take that. I don't know, I've just seen the progression for them thing. I'm hoping they can make that leap and do that this year. It'd be great. And obviously, they won the bowl game this year as well. I don't think they've won too many of those. I think it was San Jose State they beat there. So they've got all the confidence in the world at the minute.
1987 California Raisin Bowl. which was, I think, the last time Eastern won a game.
I was about to say, I think we came up with that stat while we were doing it, but it's been a very long time. I think it's before either me and Ryan were born that the last time they won one, so it's big for them. No, geez, and move on to the other Michigan teams then, because they all disappointed the other Michigan teams did this year. They were not great compared to what they were. I mean, we've talked about the Chippewas a bit, but what happened with Lou this year? 2,000 yards all-purpose the season before, one of the best... Well, I think he was Ryan's best running back in college football 2 years ago. He said he was just that good. And then, down to about 3 yards a carry this year. It just all sort of fell apart for him.
Well, there's a number of factors that went into Lou Nichols specifically. A bit of a background. Lou Nichols was initially I think a third running back. When Jonathan Ward was the starter, it was Jonathan Ward, and then it was Kobe Lewis, and then it was Lou Nichols. And I think Kobe Lewis lost, he got injured, I believe, and that allowed Lou Nichols to get some run. And that was a really big deal for his development, because ultimately, after Jonathan left, Lou ended up becoming the slated starter. And, he broke out in that, in 2020 was a really good year for him. So we saw a little bit of what he was capable of. And then 2021, he had that breakout season, of course. He won MAC Offensive Player of the Year. He was the country's leading rusher. And everyone was all in on Sweet Lou. He was going to be like a mid-round draft pick, and people were really excited for him because he's going to be this, hulking power back who's really young. He's only 21 at the moment, coming out for the NFL draft. So what ultimately happened was Central lost their offensive coordinator late in the cycle. I think he ended up going to Kevin Barbay. He ended up becoming the offensive coordinator over at Appalachian State. And that required Central to scramble for an offensive coordinator because they were not expecting that loss. They ended up hiring former Idaho head coach Paul Petrino. And he has a decidedly different philosophy of offense than Kevin Barbay. It's one I don't necessarily agree with, but, you get what you got. And that was a lot more of a RPO, screen-dependent look than Kevin Barbay had, who was a little more of a vertical run threat. And so Lou Nichols' role changed a little bit in that offense. Combine that with some departures. So on the receivers, you lost Khalil Pimpleton, and you lost Ja'Cory Sullivan, and then Dallas Dixon gets hurt really early in the season. And so you're already down to who would have been your second or third string in the prior season as your starters. And that makes life really difficult for a running offense because, suddenly the passing game isn't that big of a threat. So you're able to really put a lot of people in the box, and that will impact the running back. And then the two really, really big things that happened, Bernard Ryman and Luke Gedeke. They were on the ends of the offensive line. They're gone. In comes Swartout and Davis Heinzen, two redshirt freshmen. That's not working. So, Lou Nichols wasn't able to really get anything going. That offensive line really struggled to get a lot of work in, and combine that with the role change, because in the year prior he had gotten over 300 carries. He was just blasting through the interior of the line and going behind Ryman, going behind Gedeke. That wasn't the case this season. They had him trying to do a lot of screen passes, catching passes as a receiver. They had him trying to go outside a lot, which is really not his game. And they were just stuffing him behind the line because the tackles weren't able to get out, stop edge rushers. And then, of course, he gets injured probably about halfway through the season, misses 3 games as a result of that. And that hamstring is still really screwing him up. He wasn't able to do the pro day early March because he was recovering from that injury. And then, had another setback during the healing of that. He's had an individual workout, apparently, that happened at Central. We don't have numbers for that, fortunately, so I can't give you any RAS scores or anything like that. but he has a number of teams interested in him in the NFL. I think the Packers are the biggest team that I've seen associated with him. I know that makes us really sad here as Lions fans, but that is just what it is. The offense changed, a lot of the personnel changed, and there were changes that did not favor Nichols at all. I think he is still a prospect with great potential. He's a little hobbled at the moment, so he's going to tumble down. He'll be an undrafted free agent likely, but he's really young. I think his 40 will probably come in around like a low 4.5, high 4.6. He loves contact. He's a north-south runner. There will be a use for him there somewhere at the professional level.
That was going to be my next question. Ryan, is there anything you want to ask specifically about teams? Anything from the MAC last year?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, we saw some high-profile players leave the MAC. Who do you think is going to potentially do the best at their new school? Because I really like Dante Cephas, one of the best receivers in the MAC, and he landed a cushy job now at Penn State, the Nittany Lions. Like I said, Carson Steele, the great back, has wound up at UCLA to replace Zach Charbonnet. Who are these guys that are going to do well, that have taken a serious level up next, that have jumped up a level?
Honestly, I think you highlighted the two. Dante Cephas will fit in very excellent at Penn State. He was Kent State's major vertical threat over the last 2 years. He had a really good connection with Dustin Crum, especially less so with Colin Schlee, but he still showed off, massive speed. That's his thing. He is a speed vertical threat who will absolutely dust your cornerback and then catch it over your head. That's just the kind of player he is. And given Penn State's usual play style, where they like to run inside of that strong running game and then toss it on the outsides, to speed receivers who can win in contested circumstances, Cephas fits that to a T. I think that Penn State was probably the best place he could have possibly gone for the style of play that he is, and given Penn State's success in pushing out outside receivers, that's a great fit for him. But Carson Steele is the guy I'm really excited about. I mentioned earlier, I love north-south runners with power, and Carson Steele is that guy. I'm interested to see how he'll fit in Chip Kelly's offense. He's kind of a strange guy when it comes to offensive philosophies, but Carson Steele was a great player at Ball State despite Ball State. Their offensive line was one of the worst offensive lines in the country last year. I'm talking in the 120s of yards gained. I think I'm trying to remember who put up the stat exactly, so don't quote me on it. But Carson Steele was one of the country's worst running backs in terms of yards of contact, basically. He was being met either at the line or behind the line on over a third of his carries, and still managed to get gains anyway. He ended up being one of the MAC's best yards per carry runners, and especially in yards after contact, which I think is what ultimately attracted him to so many Power 5 teams, because they were able to look through, frankly, piss poor blocking and see if this guy was finding the holes anyway and making his own. So theoretically, if you're able to get him behind a really good line, or even just an average line, you'll see more dividends from that. And I think that's the gamble that UCLA is taking here. They're graduating Dorian Thompson-Robinson, as we all know. He's a pro prospect this year. And they're going to have a battle at quarterback. We assume that it's going to be Dante Moore, the 5-star quarterback out of MLK. But they also did bring in Colin Schlee from Kent State, who was their starting quarterback last year. He'll presumably fight him for that QB1 job or that backup job. And so the best friend of a quarterback who's getting used to the offense is a good running back. And so I think in that respect, if Zach Charbonnet can find, really good success behind that line and in that offense, Carson Steele should be able to fit that. He's one of the strongest running backs I think I've ever seen. He's also lightning quick. He has really good burst. I think it'll be a very good fit, and I am really excited to not be able to watch Pac-12 football because their TV contract is a load of garbage.
Yeah, kind of skirted around that issue at the minute because it just changes every day. But no, in terms of Carson Steele, I think I had him pegged as the player to watch at Ball State last year. I don't know whether that's an achievement or not because there's not a great deal else there outside of Nick Jones. But I mean, he had 1,000 yards in his freshman year 2 years ago, I think all-purpose, and then obviously they lost. I think was it Drew Plitt they lost last year, the quarterback who'd been there forever. It's like, right, they're going to lean on the running back. They're going to lean on him, and he got 1,600 yards, 14 touchdowns. He just had a monster year with them. I mean, you've obviously watched him a lot more, been in the MAC, but I think, in 12 months' time at UCLA, that fit, he could be counted amongst some of the best running backs in the country. Maybe not the Quinshon Judkins type thing, but he could certainly be at that level or nearby, couldn't he, if he does well there? Or from what you've seen of him, do you reckon he could?
I reckon he could. Like I'm not gonna come out here and be like, oh yeah, this guy's gonna be round 1, round 2 talent immediately. Yeah, bing bam boom done. No. I'm a little more realistic than that. I understand that, he does have some limitations, and that's fine. We will see when it comes to the football season how good of a fit he is in that offense, and I personally think that he will find a way to make it work because, frankly, Ball State did not really have that much of an offense this season. He had to make it up as he went along. So, in that sense, having an actual offense with actual personnel will be a really good change for him. I think, he's not gonna threaten like the top 10 backs. He's not gonna be out there running for Heisman or anything like that. But I think he'll make a nice little niche for himself somewhere firmly in the top 25 rushers this upcoming season, and that's really good for picking up somebody from a group of 5 school that went 6-6 prior season.
Oh no, absolutely. But it's one of the. Sorry, go on, Ryan.
Valladay did it as well. Like I say, when Valladay left Wyoming, went to Arizona State. Like I say, suddenly it's still like a top 20, 15 running back in the nation. So
yeah, that's the thing about Xavier Valladay too. Xavier Valladay was an excellent runner at the group of 5 level. I was surprised he left Wyoming, but then Wyoming's had some really strange departures lately, and when he got to Arizona State, I wasn't really sure about that because they had Herm Edwards as coach at the time, but he found a way to make it work, and he showed that he was able to give it his all at that at that Power 5 level, and I think you're right. That's a fairly good comparison. It's a true bet on yourself situation.
Oh God, Drew Plitt. I've had to watch that guy in the XFL this season. He stinks. It's been bad.
Drew Plitt. Yeah, bless his heart. Drew Plitt, I think, backed up a number of Ball State quarterbacks for a long time. And, he finally got his chance, and good on him. He did what he could. Yeah. But that's how it goes sometimes.
So Ryan's questions are obviously mentioned that quite a few people have left the MAC for pastures new this upcoming season, and Derek asked us a question earlier. I did see it, Derek, so I've been waiting for an adequate moment to put it in, but he's talking about obviously the new NIL rule, money rolling in, and he goes, what are your thoughts on the NIL? Obviously you cover the MAC. Have you noticed an adverse effect that NIL's having on the MAC, or is it helping? Is it helping them get people in? What's your take on the NIL situation with it all?
It's a curious case. We've seen like the Power 5 level has been able to really work at it for a while. It's been a lot more slow to grow at the Group of 5 level, and particularly in the MAC. I can't be sure that a lot of MAC teams have NIL at the moment. Like I think Ohio does, Bowling Green does, I think Western. Those are the 3 that I know of for sure who have programs. I think Kent State might have just recently established one. But regardless, it's a good thing. Like NIL generally is a good thing. I've always thought that NCAA athletes should have the opportunity to be able to ply their wares to potential sponsors as long as it's within legality. So in that sense, NIL is great. I could talk about Lou Nichols, for instance. Lou Nichols got a lot of transfer portal opportunity. A lot of teams were interested in getting a hold of him to play over there, but he opted to stay in Mount Pleasant, partly because of the fit, but also partly because he was able to get NIL opportunities with local businesses in Mount Pleasant. And so that's an instance of it really working out for them. Yeah, for for a particular player. I think as uh, FBS organizations start to understand, where they can go with name, image, and licenses and what their niche is in this particular market, they'll be able to use it to their advantage. You guys talked about earlier the cancellation of the official visit limit. That's another thing that'll ultimately really help out Group of 5 schools, because before you only had your 5 visits, so you really had to make them count, and oftentimes that meant that a lot of Group of 5 schools were cut out completely from that kind of deal. Whereas now you're able to get them in and say, look, this is the role that we hope to have for you when you're here. These are our facilities. We understand, we're not a Power 5 institution, but we have, name, image, and likeness opportunities that might be unique to here that you might not be able to get in other places. So, like, if we're talking, let's do an example. So let's say that you're Central and you're trying to out-recruit someone who wants to go to Michigan. We're talking like an edge 3-star prospect. They know that if they go to Michigan, they're probably going to be a backup for 3 years of their position. They might primarily play special teams, and they might not have any name, image, and license. Whereas at Central, if you come here, you might only have to wait 2 years or even 1 year, and you'll be able to be a starter. And hey, we've got some NIL for you that we think you might really enjoy. Central, for instance, has a lot of connections to Detroit as well. You could do something like that where you can still be a hometown prospect but go to Central kind of deal. So I think the benefits are there, but it is important for the NCAA and those FBS organizations to be able to understand that it's not unlimited and that there isn't problems.
No,
those problems do have to be addressed. Yeah,
it's still a very prickly subject, I guess, at the minute. I can see in the chat here there's people for it, against it. There's, it's... I think, like you said, it's one of those things that's still getting worked out, and we'll have to see what it's like a bit further down the line with it.
Right, and, there was a long time. There was a long time there for a while that I looked at the situation, and it was just like, oh, well, they just can't do it. Like, there's no way that you can't prevent, paying for players. As much as I would like players to be able to pursue sponsorship opportunities outside their scholarship, there's just no good legal framework to do it. But it seems like, there's being a concerted effort to be made to be able to do something like that. And so I have to have, benefit of the doubt that the powers that be are able to figure that out.
Yeah, absolutely. Ryan, is there anything else team-wise you want to ask about the MAC from last year?
Well, one question, let's say, while we're ready for draft. So let's say I'm like a 2-star quarterback with like Matt Adair, St. John Bosco. If you take out NIL, you take into account everything facilities, fan bases, where would I go? What's the most attractive MAC school to someone from, let's say, the other side of the country? Where would you recommend them to go?
That's a really intriguing question that I honestly haven't thought about a lot. If I'm a 2-star quarterback from John Bosco, that's a famous powerhouse out in California, if memory recalls.
Yeah.
There's a number of routes you could go. Personally, if I'm that quarterback, I'm going JUCO, showing that I can win out a job and then come back in a year or two and show Power 5 schools that I might be a capable backup or starter in their situation for a Group of 5. But if I want to go immediately out, and I'm for whatever reason I really want to go to the MAC, God, well, there is NIU. NIU does have a reputation of building up excellent quarterbacks and being in that Chicago market, quote unquote Chicago market, although they're in DeKalb. So that would be their pitch, is we're the Chicago MAC school. We're going to make sure that we're going to get you as many marketing opportunities as possible, especially if you're the starter here. I guess at this point it's just like, what's the most desirable market? If it's the most desirable market, Then it's NIU because that's the Chicago area. You could also talk about potentially Buffalo. They've got that Western New York market over there. In terms of what is the most attractive to me if I'm playing, Toledo has outstanding facilities that attract a lot of players over there, and they're perpetually in the title hunt. So that's going to be attractive in that situation, for instance. In terms of scholastics, if you really have a particular major that you want to be in, like as a broadcaster, if you want to have a future in broadcasting, you're going to Ball State because that's one of the country's best video journalism institutions. If it's print, you're going to Central, for instance. So it's just one of those things where it's dependent on the prospect themselves and what opportunities they think that they can avail of themselves.
I do remember Jordan Lynch, one of the best college quarterbacks I've ever seen. That NIU team was ridiculous under him.
I've seen that Jordan Lynch NIU team in person. Back when I was a student, they came to face Central that year that they ended up going to the Orange Bowl. God, that team was annoying. It was just it was one of those teams that you watch and you knew what they were going to do. You knew what they were going to do, and you could not stop it. And it was just from that, and it was like, oh my God, how are they not getting in front of this guy? How is this guy evading them? And it's not just Jordan. They had a number of really good players back then, just an impossibly stacked unit. It's a football team that I have massively respected, and I'm glad to say that I've seen play in person.
So, we've sort of talked about some of the bigger teams. Just sort of rounding this off, were there any other teams, Matt-wise, this year, who sort of really disappointed you? Is there anyone you're feeling really optimistic about, even if they didn't do so well? What were some of your overriding feelings about some of the other teams sort of coming out of that year?
I guess I'll go with a disappointing team and an optimistic team.
Yeah.
The disappointing team would be Western. Western was expected to be in contention this season. They had paid Tim Lester the highest salary in the MAC for quite some time. He was making well over $1 million and just was not delivering any results. They had a number of great players coming back this season, especially on defense, and they just didn't get it done. I don't know what else there is to say about Western that hasn't already been said about them. They are perpetual underperformers. They did not have any kind of clutch gene. Their play calling was always questionable, on offense and defense. Frankly, shouldn't be losing recruiting battles to Eastern. You're a better historical program than they are. Just everything about Western at the end of the Tim Lester thing just was frustrating. It was clear something had to be done at the end of that season. And so it was really disappointing because they've had a number of great prospects come out of there. Levante Bellamy ended up in the pros. Dwayne Eskridge ended up in the pros. Ali Fayyad is currently in the USFL, I believe, with the Philadelphia Stars. They've had so much good talent over there. Caleb Ellaby even, was looked at as a potential NFL draft pick when he came out. Although he came out too early, in my opinion. He needed to stay another year. They've had so much talent go through there that it is a disappointment that it didn't. Even the talent that they did ultimately put out there was still really raw when they ended up in the professional level, and that comes down to the coaching staff not being able to develop said players. It's just, I do wonder how it's going to look under Lance Taylor, who is the new head coach there. It'll be his first gig. Former Louisville OC, I think he's had time of Notre Dame, Alabama. A lot of the big hitters in terms of coaching staff. They're really hoping that they're going to be able to knock it out of the park with another, PJ Fleck-esque hire. Because Tim Lester was a homer hire. Basically, they say, well, PJ Fleck has left really late in the cycle. We're not very happy about that. So we're going to hire somebody that the fans can be really happy about. We're going to go get Tim Lester, former Western Michigan quarterback. He's had some success in college sometimes, maybe. We're going to make it work. They're depending on his X's and O's, and it just didn't happen. Lance Taylor, on the other hand, is a guy who's known for his recruiting style, very similar to PJ Fleck when he came out. And so the assumption is we're just going to do what we did with Fleck. We're going to get as much talent as possible. We're going to get some really good coordinators on staff to figure out the X's and O's, and we'll go from there. So, like, you know, Western is starting to get into that, like, old Toledo territory of you're a paper tiger. You know, you've got talent, but you got nothing to show for it. And so that's why they were so disappointing last year, is because we know that team is capable of 8-4. They're capable of 9-3. They did it. 2021, they were 8-4, and they didn't get to go. They didn't get to go to the MAC East title. And, you know, there are other years before that where they, you know, tied for the MAC West, but weren't able to go to the title because they lost a tiebreaker to a team they shouldn't have lost to. It's just one of those things where it's like they just couldn't do it, and that's why they were so disappointing. On the other end of it, the Akron Zips. I really, really, really am in on the Akron Zips, and it's not just because of Zippy, who is a queen and the best mascot in the MAC by a large margin. Joe Moorhead is over there. He has a lot of Power 5 coaching experience. Former head coach at Mississippi State, came in from Oregon, where he was the offensive coordinator for Justin Herbert, amongst others. It is evident that is a new program. Like, I know that their record says that they're like 2-10 or 3-9 or something like that, but that was a very thorny 2-9, 2-10, 3-9. This was not like the Tom Arth teams of the past, or the sundowning Terry Bowden teams of the past who were losing games by 15, 24, and just looking listless on both sides of the ball. This was a team that had a very clear understanding of what it was on both sides of the ball and executed. And that is something that I think moving forward will be very important for them. They brought in Joe Moorhead, who used to be on the Akron staff the last time they won the MAC title game in 2005, to be the X's and O's guy and to have the reputation, from his time in the Power 5 circles of being able to bring in recruits, which he did very well. He was very aggressive in the transfer portal last year. I think he brought in, Lord above, he probably brought in 30 plus transfers last season alone. Like a lot of the guys at their pro day were formerly from other schools. A lot of guys currently on their roster are from other schools. And so he actively made the decision, we might be Akron, we're a traditional loser program, but we're not going to be Akron. We're not going to look for those underdog guys who could probably start a D2 school, or these two-star prospects and hope to develop them. No, we're going to be really active. We're going to go after the 3-star guys. We're going to go after transfers that we know are able to play and have traits. And we're going to act like this is an FBS football program, which for a long time, Akron did not. And so that has been the main difference. The main difference has been simply in talent acquisition and developing a culture of accountability. And those showed out really big at the tail end of the year when Akron started winning a lot of those games that people didn't expect them to in ways that they did not expect them to. And that gives me a lot of hope for that program moving forward, because I really do want to see it succeed. Like when Eastern was going through all those troubles in the mid-2010s, I wanted to see them succeed because, the bottom of the conference being really good is good for the rest of the conference. Like, you want to see your conference mates succeed. You don't want them to, you don't want to have to worry about losing them or just them being bad forever. You want them to be competitive because that is better for everyone. And Akron is that case in the MAC East, akin to Eastern and the MAC West. They're a really young program. I think they only became FBS in 1997. So they've had a lot to learn. And I think, frankly, they're in a football-rich state like Ohio. They shouldn't be losing prospects to FCS, D2, D3 schools like they were in the past. If they can get a couple good years under Moorhead here, that might change the dynamic of, recruiting against their MAC peers in the state of Ohio, which they have to compete against 5 of them. So, like, any advantage they can get is going to be really good for them. And I think Joe Moorhead understands that and is aware of that and has been there. He was there when Akron won the MAC. He understands specifically, like, how the Zips work and operate. And I think that is why I'm really optimistic about them.
I'm not gonna lie, that is the last team I thought I would hear in the answer, but that's really positive. Like you say, you want the lesser teams to do better, and we've seen this year. You saw the rise of UConn. You've seen Eastern Michigan, Kansas, Duke, all these traditionally bad teams who seem to finally be putting it together, and it makes the game much better because they've been some of the funnest teams to watch this season. So. Okay, right. We'll keep the eye on Akron next forward. I do like the quarterback DJ Irons. I think he's going to be good. I saw some great stuff from him this year. So
I think Daniel Jeremiah. I remember in the middle of the season, Daniel Jeremiah was hooting and hollering about DJ Irons going to be like a top 5 prospect for quarterbacks in the next draft. I was like, whoa, slow your roll. Like we saw a lot to learn about DJ Irons. Like he's got that size and frame though. That's the thing about him. He's a big boy. He's like 6'5", 6'6", sits at around 240 pounds playing weight. He's got a cannon arm. So like I can see why, people would be so excited about him already. But, he had some injury woes last season, and he's gonna have to show that he can be fully healthy if he wants to, lead Akron to victory and further down the road, show that he's a capable pro prospect.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Long way to go for him and that team yet, so we'll see what happens then. So, we've talked about the teams, let's talk about some of the players that have sort of impressed this year. Ryan, I'll come over to you first. In terms of players in the MAC that you enjoyed watching this year, who stands out for you when you think about it?
I'm pretty sure he's in the MAC. Is it Brett Gabbert? Blaine Gabbert's little brother. Is he the Miami quarterback?
Yes, he is.
He is. For the last 2 years, I've been really impressed with him. Like you say, they always gone about and being like the younger one, Blaine's, but I feel like he's had a good, strong lead of the Miami Ohio offense for the last 2 years now. I feel like he's quite a solid prospect, despite being fairly average build, average arm. He has been someone that stood out, especially for quarterback play. I feel like in the MAC in recent times.
Yeah, Brett Gabbert is a nice little boy there. He followed a guy named Gus Ragland. I think he ended up replacing that guy, and they both remind me of each other a little bit. They're both a little undersized for what you might expect out of a quarterback, but they're both really scrappy players. They're gamers, I guess would be the way to say it. They're kind of like Baker Mayfield in a way. That same kind of quarterback, really tough. A bit of a leader on the field, gets the throws done when necessary, has a lot of legs to be able to escape incoming pressure and get yards from there. And good news, Brett Gabbert will be back in 2023 for Miami. He did enter the transfer portal initially. I assume to try and get some scholarships at the Power 5 level, but he must not have seen what he liked what he saw rather. And he is back on the spring football roster at the very least. So we can get another year of Brett Gabbert in Miami. And hopefully, Miami figures the rest of its crap out. Because they've got Brett Gabbert, and he's really good. But there's a lot there in Miami that just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. In terms of how it works.
I don't know. I think there's some sneaky good quarterback talent in the MAC at the minute. You have Gabbert in there. You've got Curtis Froke in there. You've got DJ Irons coming through. DeQuan Finn's quite good as well. Even Central's right. I like Daniel Richardson. So there's some sneaky
Daniel Richardson will not be in Mount Pleasant next year. Daniel Richardson transferred out to Florida Atlantic. So he will be helping them out as they transition to the American Athletic Conference. It's closer to home. He's a Miami-Dade kid. So figured that was kind of coming. He had been benched in place of Burt Emanuel about halfway through this season, which this kind of thing tends to happen with Central in the Jim McElwain era. A lot. I don't know why that happens. I don't know what it is about their quarterback scouting department that is this way. But we had this issue with Quentin Dormady, XFL legend Quentin Dormady, and David Moore for a little bit there, and then David Moore became ineligible, and so the year after that it was, oh Lord, what was that kid's name? He was a 4-star from Washington. Yeah, one of the Jacobs that was out there. Regardless, that guy came in, and Daniel Richardson replaced him because that guy was extremely ineffective. And Daniel Richardson gets replaced in and of himself by Burt Emanuel, who was then in and of himself replaced by Chase Bauer. So it's one of those things where, Central's got some good quarterbacks. We all saw Burt Emanuel run for 11,000 yards against Buffalo on weeknight in action, and then they also really like Chase Bauer, who they managed to reel in from Iowa, and he's been showing out in spring ball. I think he had 3 touchdowns and over 240 yards in the spring scrimmages. I'd favor him to be the starter at the moment, Bauer, but Emmanuel also has a lot to show for himself. We'll see how that situation plays itself out for Central.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, go on.
Is Kyle Van Treese, is he still at Buffalo, the quarterback?
Kyle Van Treese is over at Georgia Southern. Clay Helton picked him up at in the last off season to help them transition from their triple option to more of that spread offense that's more prevalent in college. I don't recall if it's his last year of eligibility, but I know that's where he was last season.
Yeah, I think it was his 6th year, if I remember. I'm not sure, but he seems to have been around forever. Before I pivot the player question over to you, James, there's one guy I did want to ask about, because I seem to like my freshman running backs coming out of the MAC at the minute. Last year it was Carson Steele, but Carson Steele's gone now, so there needs to be another guy. But the one who really caught the eye, the Ohio running back, I'm not going to butcher his first name because I've not learned the pronunciation yet, but it's Bangura, isn't it? The running back from Ohio. He looks really promising this year. I think he broke the 1,000-yard barrier, but I loved watching him play this year.
I believe it's C.A. Bangura.
I didn't want to do it any injustice, so I will start with his name there. But he looks very promising. I mean, he was a freshman this year, right?
I'm looking it up right now just to remind myself, but I do believe he's a redshirt. He's listed as a redshirt sophomore. So last year was his redshirt freshman year. Looking at the stats now, 7 touchdowns on 107 carries. This is pretty good. His emergence in now it's all coming back to me. His emergence in the backfield, because they had some backfield issues for a while at Ohio as well. Recall I was talking about personnel issues in week 4. A lot of the shuffling they did on defense also happened in the offense a little bit in trying to figure out who was in the right roles there. I think they had Julian Ross taking some carries back there for the majority of the first part of the season. But C.A. Bangura is another one of those powerful north-south runners that tend to find themselves in the MAC. He's a bit of a bowling ball at 6', 200. Great lateral agility as well. He's able to work inside and outside and has shown some hands every so often. So I'm really looking forward to seeing his development there. Like, him and Rourke played off of each other very well last season, and I think with another full season to develop, in spring ball, that connection will become even better. I think, they're largely returning the same offensive line as well, so that'll also help. The issue for Bangura, however, is going to be staying healthy. He was only available in 7 games last season, which caused a bit of a ruckus, back and forth. I think at one point they were playing Jake Netherington, who's like their 4th or 5th string back in that backfield. So a lot of potential with Bangura. That's one of the youngsters I would keep my eye on.
No, absolutely, will be doing so. So I'll pivot to you. So in terms of players, and maybe omit the draft prospects here, because we're going to talk about them after we've done this question, but who caught your eye in the MAC last year? Obviously, you write a lot, you watch all the teams there. Who sort of jumped out to you this season?
That's a good question. Admittedly, I watched the MAC a little differently from the way I did it in prior seasons. This year, I really wanted to get to know like pro prospects from this season. So I was watching a lot of the upperclassmen. So like your Montre Millers, for instance, that was a corner out of Kent State. He's going to be somebody to look out for. I think next season he becomes eligible. He was a first-team All-MAC corner, excellent in coverage, speed to keep up vertically with the best of receivers, really good instinct. Dante Kent, he's the guy from Central. He's another one of those shut down man-to-man press corners. Central is really good at making those in recent years with Sean Murphy Bunting. I think Xavier Crawford also came out from there as well. Even going back historically, Jaleel Adai, Avery Cunningham are all kind of that guy coming out of Central. But yeah, I watched a little difference. So admittedly, I'm not as big. A lot of the guys I might have said here also departed.
Yeah.
For other schools, which does not help. So, Samson Evans was really good. I'm talking about over at Eastern, over at now I'm trying to go down my list of schools here, just from memory, and that's also proving to be really hard. Admittedly, I did do a lot of my focus on the draft.
So I'll round it round then. You know Central very well. If there's a player that people need to know about next year from Central, maybe they don't, who would you say?
Well, Jace Bauer. I did briefly mention Jace Bauer when we were talking about quarterbacks. I know a lot of people are going to have their eye on Burt Emanuel after he really showed out in prime time. But, the indications that I've gotten from looking at the spring scrimmage reports is that Bauer has been doing very well, and has established a lot of connections there. And, if you watch the tape last season, I think he has tape against Bucknell, and he might have some late season tape as well that I can't recall the teams he might have played against. But he is a true dual threat quarterback. He's not exclusively a pocket passer like Daniel Richardson was. He's not an athletic runner like Burt Emanuel is, and that's Burt Emanuel's thing. Burt Emanuel's a runner. He really struggled when he was asked to pass this season. He's going to need some time to develop that. Jace Bauer can do both. He can pass and he can run, and that will give him an inside edge, I think, on the quarterback race this year. He showed excellent touch on short and medium passes. Might need to work on deep passes a little bit. And he also showed some really good acceleration when he decides to scramble. And that's going to be key for an offensive line that's going to be rebuilding next season. Because you've still got those, they're now redshirt sophomore tackles, but you're losing a lot of your interior this year. Jamez Kimbrough graduated after 6 years playing between center and guard, for instance. I think Deontay Powell-Woods is also getting close to graduating as well. So, yeah, that's one guy. That's one guy I would definitely look out for.
Okay.
Certainly.
All right.
From Central.
Yeah, okay, lovely. Right, so let's switch it then. Let's talk about the guys of the now. So, draft is coming up in 8 days, as we know, and the MAC prospects don't always get the most exclusive coverage in the world, so I thought we wanted to shine a little bit of a light on there. But there are a lot of guys coming out here, potentially a lot of sleepers in this draft for the MAC, particularly on the defensive line. I've noticed there's a lot coming out. I'll come over to you first, Rye, but who are you looking at in terms of the MAC players this year, who you're really sort of interested in? 'Cause a lot of local talent around Detroit, and they're looking at a lot of them. So who are you really interested in?
On either side of the ball?
Either side, go for it.
So, let's say, James, I'm interested, what do you think? Unfortunately, Clint Rakovich, let's say, he tore his ACL, didn't he, in this off-season, literally while I was preparing for the draft, who had I'd say he was one of the more true full-backs potentially in this period. Do you think he's now going to be a UDFA? Could he have been a day 3 guy had he not?
If I recall correctly, Rakovich got some workouts I want to say in the last cycle, I think it was Chicago, specifically Chicago and Green Bay. He may have latched on to one of those teams as a future. I don't quite remember on it at the moment, honestly. But Rakovic is a fascinating case. He's a true uber athlete. He could play fullback, running back, for sure. He even played a little bit of quarterback. Just one of those jack of all trades, kind of like a, I hate to say it, but like a Taysom Hill, almost. Just a guy who doesn't look the part athletically, but is able to contribute at a number of different positions. And I think, it was unfortunate for him to tear his ACL when he did, because I think if he had not torn his ACL, he was slated for day 3. For sure. I think a team would have taken a chance on him 6 or 7.
Yeah, absolutely. Any of those defensive line guys right this year? I mean, obviously, again, a lot of Michigan prospects, a lot of local guys. Anyone stands out?
The big name is everyone knows Carl Brooks, don't they? The defensive lineman out of Bowling Green that's been shooting up draft boards. As I say, he's able to win on the inside, win on the outside. Had a year just wrecking shit, wasn't he? He was just fucking shit up this line. Like, he had a phenomenal year.
Yeah, Carl's an interesting case. He, for whatever reason, Scott Loeffler, in his infinite grace, decided that Carl Brooks was a stand-up end at, I believe his playing weight was over 300 pounds. Like 6'3", 300, and he's playing stand-up end. Don't know why, but that was his position this year. But at the pro level, he will project to probably be a 3-tech. I think he will end up playing in the interior. He was a combine snub, as everybody knows. He's visited with well over a dozen teams by now. I wouldn't be surprised if he's visited with everyone at this point. His split this year in terms of tackles for loss, sacks, 50, 18, and 10, which is really impressive for a defensive lineman of his weight, especially because at 300 pounds you start to become a bit of a bear in terms of how you're able to move. But he just found a way to make it work. He has really good first step. That is the biggest thing about Carl Brooks. It is his burst when he gets off the line, combined with his ability to create mismatches based on that speed. So he's a little bit undersized height-wise, and a little undersized, length and hands. But he just has this way of getting such a quick first step that it knocks a lot of his opponents out of place. They have to try and, scramble to make sure he doesn't get past. And he's able to use that motor to push right past them and get to the backfield. Like, you'll see if you look at Senior Bowl practice highlights, he's doing a lot of rip and tear, essentially. He's coming up from that 3-point or 3-point or 4-point, and then he's just kind of squeezing in or tearing away, an attempt at a grab, and then pursuing immediately. That's his biggest strength. He's a power pusher, and he has a good sense of balance. You don't see him off balance very often, if at all. It's just incredible how he's able to move around like that at that weight. His positional versatility is ultimately what is getting him a lot of these attractions at the pro level, because up till last year he was just largely an interior guy, but this year he showed that he could also play on the edge. And in today's NFL, you need those guys with that positional versatility, and if you can get that defensive versatility of a guy who is standing at like 6'3", 300 pounds, go get that guy. Even if his ceiling is somewhat limited, that's still going to be an athletic freak that you're able to utilize in certain sub packages.
So, where do you expect to see him go? So obviously, no one was really talking about him sort of end of season. Then he became the off-season darling, especially at the Senior Bowl, where he just looked amazing. And then you just got this sort of feeling, just like in these last couple of weeks up to the draft, it's sort of just gone a little bit quiet on him. I don't know why. It just might be one of those things. But where do you expect to see him go, roughly?
I think part of the reason why it's gone a little bit quiet, and this is true of all positions, save I think probably the top 10 really, is that this draft is largely solved. edge and defensive line is a really deep class this year, much like corner, and we'll just talk about that a little bit when we get to Nick Jones. It's just it's deep this year, and that's probably part of why it's gone so quiet. But if we have to talk about ranges of where he's picked, I think I've seen Brooks probably projected somewhere between, at the highest, round 3, and probably at the lowest, like late round 5, early round 6. And I think that's pretty fair for a prospect of Brooks's pedigree. BG was not the best defense in the world out there, and he did put up a lot of stats out there. Again, 18 tackles for loss and 10 sacks last year. That's ridiculous. And he already had really good numbers the year before. I think he was ended up being a first team all MAC guy this year. It's just, that versatility is huge. Like, if he was restricted to one position, if he was an edge or a tackle, it would be lower. But because of the fact he can play both those positions and play multiple defensive line positions, because he can do 3, he can do 1, he can do edge, that's where his value comes in. I think it would be fair to expect him to go between 3 and 4, and you're getting a steal if you get him in 5 or 6.
Yeah, I kind of would agree with you there on that one. Sorry, were you going to say something?
Do you think the Lions have a need for him, or is he a bit similar to Josh Pascal in the sense of that positional versatility inside and out?
Well, he was a top 30 visit to Detroit, so you have to read into that at least a little bit. And he fits kind of that profile of what they look for in terms of defensive linemen. And, between all of us Lions fans here, we all know that Brad Jones loves this specific type of player. So, yeah, you could well look at it as being kind of like a Josh Pascal. It's just one of those things where defensive line particularly, it is really easy to really quickly lose a lot of talent and depth. And so if you're looking at somebody like a Brooks, or like we'll talk about here in a minute, Incoom or Johnson, it's because you see a parallel with them of somebody who already has a starter on your roster and want to be able to have the knowledge that you have somebody who is similar to them right behind them, so you can put them there right away. In case you do end up losing them. And if you don't, and if your starters are still healthy, you still have some really good contributors along your defensive line who are able to fill in, for some breather reps or give you immediate value on special teams or sub packages. And so, as a NFL GM, you want to dot your I's and you want to cross your T's and make sure that you have as much information as you can about a certain player. And with Brooks in particular, Brooks has been looked at by, I think, at least 2 other teams in the NFC North. So you want to understand why other teams in your division are also going after this guy.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll move it on from Brooks. You mentioned the guys there, but there's a lot of defensive line talent coming out the back this year. You don't just have Carl Brooks. You mentioned Thomas Incoom from Central Michigan. You've got Jose Ramirez coming out of Eastern Michigan. You've got DeJuan Johnson coming out of Toledo. Now, this time last year, we sort of had our tabs on Ali Fayed, who had just come out of, I think it was Western. He had racked up stats for days, and you thought, oh god, there's a good chance he might get drafted, and then he ended up never touching the NFL. With Incoom and Ramirez, I think they're kind of in similar territory where they're like, they might be drafted, they might not be. Do you see a different predicament? Do you see them two actually getting drafted this year, or might they go the way of Ali Fayed as well?
Well, you'll excuse me for having to look this up fairly quickly, but I think the case with Ali Fayed was, if you look at his...
It was his size, wasn't it? Oh.
It was the size.
Yeah.
So, with Fayed, he was really good in college, and I really liked Ali Fayed. I think in the past I had advocated for him to be, look out for this guy for first team All-MAC, look out for this guy for, defensive player of the year, and he was in the running both those times that I'd said that. So I was like, yeah, he's a great player, but he was undersized and he was somewhat limited in terms of his other athletic scores. The difference this year is that, Incoom,
has the
Ramirez,
length.
Johnson are all excellent in relative athletic score. I think, Incoom alone is 8.5 at defensive end. He's 9.1 at defensive tackle. Deshaun Johnson, his Raz comp is Hall of Fame defensive end Bryant Young. Like Jose Ramirez is another guy who had, an 8+ relative athletic score, and at the combine he was first place basically in every agility drill. So it's just one of those guys who, all three of them are genuinely impressive athletes who also had production. And that's the difference between these three and someone like an Ali Fayyad from the last draft cycle.
So, do you expect them to get drafted then, these three? You've seen them, you've watched them play a lot. Do you expect them all to hear their name called?
Incoom and Ramirez, absolutely. Those two will absolutely be drafted. I've seen Incoom could probably go anywhere from, depending on how you feel about him, kind of like Carl Brooks, from round 3 to round 6. Jose Ramirez, he's probably a day 3 pick. I'd expect him to go somewhere between the 5th and the 7th. A lot of people have been saying the 7th, but I think he's worth a little more than that, given how deep this class is. But again, that's another thing about deep classes, is that sometimes a guy who you expect to go in the 5th might end up going in the 7th just because, certain positions are so deep. And so that's something you have to look out for. But, ultimately, Ramirez is firmly in day 3 just because of his age. And, some teams might feel that he might not develop that, run-stopping instinct necessarily. So he'd be a very much a pass rush specialist type of guy. I think a James Houston for Detroit. So they might not want to take that gamble with a higher pick. Incoom is another guy who's fairly raw. He's only played defensive end since he got to Valdosta, which was back 2018. So there's still a lot of football for him to learn, and that's also why he's so low comparatively to his relative athletic score. But there's a lot to like about those two. And then there's Deshaun Johnson. His profile is ultimately, he's a 5-year starter, and so some teams will value that, certainly, which could be how he gets drafted. But other teams will look at that age and be concerned because he's played 5 years, he might not be able to be an immediate contributor, and he doesn't play special teams, he's exclusively on the defensive line, so what are we going to be able to do with him, basically? So that's the concern with Johnson. I can go more into all three of those guys in depth here sooner, but that's the basic summation of expectations of being drafted. Johnson, Ramirez, day 3 probably. Incoom, Brooks, likely in day 2, could fall day 3 depending on how, draft boards shake out.
Yeah. Right. Out of them on the deal, is there any of those you would take out of the 4 that you would particularly be interested in?
I do.
Oh, so
sorry, I didn't realize that question was not for me. My apologies.
It will be in a minute.
I do like Ramirez, but as you say, he's never going to play first down. Because when teams want to establish the run, I can't trust him to have him on the field. So he's more of a third down, third and long, get off the field kind of guy. So that he's got that. He's got his niche, which I feel like he's the guy. Yeah, he's gonna be one of the guys that slide. So if he's there in the 6th round and we get one of those rounders, I'd probably throw a flyer at him.
I'd be putting my money on Thomas Incoom. I do really like Thomas Incoom. You see the length, you see the bend he can get. I would happily take him here on day 3. James, is there any of the 4, the D linemen there, that you would like to see at the Lions? Out of them all, you think scheme fit or just you like them?
Ideally, I'd like to see all 4 personally as a Lions fan. But, it is all ultimately dependent on fit, I feel like. In terms of, I'm trying to look from top 30 visits and scheme fit. I don't think Incoom is necessarily on the Lions roster, but a guy like Carl Brooks, a guy like Deshaun Johnson, a guy like Jose Ramirez, those are all on the Lions radar, I would think. But like we already said, you already have Jose Ramirez essentially in James Houston. So really, it ultimately comes down to who you think will perform better on the interior of the defensive line. And Deshaun Johnson, that's the guy I just keep looking at. And it's like, he's really super versatile. He's a hometown guy. They'll get as much information as they can on him. I just can't help but feel like it's Deshaun Johnson. He had an extremely productive career at Toledo. 210 total tackles, 45 and a half TFL, 14 and a half sacks. He played basically any role that you could ask of him on the defensive line. He'll probably be a 3-tech or an edge. He has an impressive 40. He ran a 5.02 with a 1.7 second 10. Like, that's a ridiculous burst to start with. And he's a little undersized. He's 6'1", 275. But much like we talked about with Brooks is, him and Brooks are largely the same. It's just a matter of whether you want to draft a backup defensive tackle or backup defensive lineman day 2 or day 3. They both excel at using their speed to create mismatches and then having really good technique to be able to get into the backfield and penetrate and finish plays. I think personally that Johnson is a little more balanced of the two of them. He's really good in run. He's really good in run stopping and in pass rush. And he also has some zone coverage. Like, he got a lot better at dropping back into zone coverage in his senior season. He even came down to an interception towards the end of the year. And, like, it's that play in particular where it's like, oh, okay, he can move around like that at 6'1", 275. I think the pro day, he came in at 285. But just the fact that he's able to move around laterally so quickly, the fact that he can get into the backfield, the fact that he can play any defensive line role that you ask of him because he has experience there. And on exotic sub-packages, you can ask him to drop back into zone coverage. That's a guy I think that the Lions would be really interested in.
And it's not like they haven't got history. Because, I mean, if you think last year, Demetrius Taylor made the 53. I mean, I loved him, and he's sort of that disruptive 3-tech tackle in there as well. And I used to want him to succeed, but I think they.
Yeah, I was also a really big fan of Demetrius Taylor coming out last year, and I think that you're looking at someone very similar here in Deshaun Johnson.
Yeah, that's why I think he might stand out as well, because I've heard his name more recently, Deshaun Johnson. It feels like his name's the one getting mentioned out of a lot of the local guys around the fan base.
he had a really good. I want to say it was the Hula Bowl he was in this year. He had a really good showing at that session, which I think started his acceleration in terms of being a prospect.
Oh, it was the Boca Raton Bowl against Liberty.
Oh, no, I'm talking about the college all-star game.
Oh, right, sorry, yeah, my bad.
All good. But yeah, it was there. A lot of people started looking into Deshaun Johnson. He had a really good performance there in the sessions and in the game. And then he had a really good pro day. Like I said, he put down a really elite RAS score there. I want to say it was somewhere in the 7s or 8s for him. So that's the guy I look and say, yeah, I think that guy would be a really good fit here. It certainly helps he's a hometown kid.
Yeah.
He's from Detroit. And then, he played in Toledo, which is also not too far away from Detroit. So they would have a lot of knowledge and awareness of his ability to play.
Yeah, definitely. So we talked about the D-line a bit. We can go back to him a bit if you want. But out of the other position groups from the MAC, you think defense and one of the other sort of, I don't want to say Cinderella stories, but one of the risers, and you mentioned him earlier, came from a certain Ball State cornerback who we've all gotten to like quite a lot in the Lions. It's all been cornerback talk, mainly at the top of the draft here, but it's in play, and they're not shy in taking corners all throughout the draft if they have to, and you've got to figure he might be on there. But of course, we're talking about Nick Jones. He's the cornerback from Ball State. He's a ball hawk. He's a player, isn't he, James?
Nick Jones honestly was really impressive this season. I think I actually wrote an in-depth draft profile about him which you can find on hustlebelt.com. Please go look and subscribe. He was not on the draft radar at all coming into this season. I remember going through the 2022 previews and seeing Nick Jones start to pop up on the depth chart. And like, man, I don't really remember a lot about him. That's because there wasn't a lot to remember. He was primarily a special teamer when he first started at Ball State. Then he got a chance to start, and he got injured. And so we didn't get to see a lot of him. And anyways, there were other guys on that secondary that were bigger names at the time. I think Bryce Cosby, who ended up with the Raiders as a safety, was on that team for instance. And then you have AJ Uzadinma, who is also on that team and is draft eligible this year as well. That was like the big defensive back name for them going into that season, and he'd been on all MAC teams, and he's generally excellent in coverage. And so you see Nick Jones, and you're like, oh, well, that's fodder. They needed somebody to play the position. But as you got through the season, you really saw somebody who was just cerebral. That's the word with him. He talked about in the off season, when he was injured, that he couldn't do anything else. And so he decided to sit and watch a lot of film study, and that very clearly came through. His technique improved a lot more. His coverage was a lot better, especially in press situations. He is a perfectly sized nickel corner. He's 5'11", 189. So if you stick him in the nickel, or maybe you have him as a dime, and you have him play in this really specific zone, or coverage type deal, he is going to be very good. I'm not sure if I would play him on the outside at the professional level. He's capable of playing outside, and he does have some good tape against Tennessee in that respect. But I think at the pro level, his immediate contribution is going to be as a nickel. It's because of his ball skills and his unorthodox technique that he's managed to make work. I'm thinking particularly of a highlight from the East-West game where he is shadowing a corner, and then he has this really open, roundabout when the receiver makes their cut. And you might look at that initially and be like, oh, well, those hips are a little too open right now. But he's taking such a long, outward look, and then he immediately cuts in. He knows the ball is coming. Just one of those things where he's just he knows that ball is going to be there. He knows how this receiver is going to run this route. And so he feels like he can afford to take a little bit of a longer road to get there. And you saw that move a lot in the East-West Shrine Bowl game itself. He was also capable of hanging out in zone coverage. His interception in that game was on zone, more or less. Letting the receiver get behind him because he knew the ball was coming on that short look. So he's capable of playing man and zone. He's capable of playing inside. And I think he's just perfect on that nickel role, where his ball skills and his ability to press, which are his two biggest strengths, outside of reading the back, the quarterback's eyes, will come into play. Outside, a little more of a liability. Not the fastest of 40s. I think he came in at 4.6. And he struggled against some of the faster receivers on the outside. But, outside is probably not reason to play at the next level. The biggest thing that I like about him, and I think will be his immediate value in the NFL, special teams. He's played in all 4 special teams phases. He is acutely aware of the intricacies of, punt, block, field goal, kickoff, all that. He has 2 blocks to his name in his career as well, so he's perfectly capable of getting behind a line. And I think ultimately the team that drafts him, and he will be drafted, I think he'll be drafted in day 3, somewhere between 5 and 7. You're getting a special teams contributor immediately, which gives him great value on a 53-man roster, and somebody that could maybe start to build up to be a rotational defensive back, and at his ceiling can be a starter.
Derek Cassie goes, at nickel, does he have the speed to recover? He won't be able to press in the slot.
Yeah, that's going to be the difficult part, ultimately, of that transition, because he did it pretty well at Ball State. But, again, it's the pros are a whole different speed, and that's the gamble that you're ultimately taking with them. Yeah. I think if you do draft him, you have to be cognizant that the recovery speed may not be there, initially. Now, if you can find ways to help him refine his technique and be able to, make up for his lack of speed by having other things internally with him, you can make that work. But at minimum, you're drafting somebody who's an immediate special teams ace who might be able to contribute on the defense. And at the ceiling, you're finding a really smart corner who is able to play inside and outside. So, if I'm a team who's drafting him, I'm drafting him immediately for his special teams needs with the hopes that my coaches are able to develop him into something more.
You a Nick Jones fan, Rye?
I am, yeah, and I agree in the sense that he will be that Robert Rochelle or that Jacoby Durant, like say the last 2 years, like say those group of 5 schools, like say they went through the special teams and they kind of won rotational roles in the last 2 years with their teams, and they are well drafted on day 3 specifically. He's going to follow this exact same route probably.
I look at Nick Jones in a similar way that Samuel Womack was for San Francisco last year. A real flyer 7th round pick that they took, and he's like, we know he can play special teams, and he's got instincts to play another defensive back position, so we're going to take a gamble on that, and it worked out for them pretty well. So I see a very similar fate for Nick Jones, assuming that he ends up in the right place.
That's it. It's all about fit, isn't it? Just you get the guy in the right place. It's like Joshua Williams landed in Kansas last year, going around. He landed in the right place, won himself a Super Bowl. It's all about fit. So I hope he finds the right spot. I think we might be interested in him to a degree. Plays the way we like. Other sort of prospects, Matt-wise. I know, Rye, you watched the Red Hawks a lot, Miami, Ohio. It's Gabbett's there. It was Sterling Weatherford the year before. We have Sterling Weatherford's biggest fan here. They have a pair of wide receivers coming out this year. Everyone's favourite name bracket challenge, the Hip Hop Hammer, like Hip and Hammer. And then you've got, is it Jalen Walker there? Do you like those 2 prospects coming through into the draft? And because I know Hip and Hammer's got like a 2 Raz or something, but he looks the real.
I was about to say the Miami Pro Day was a bit of a struggle for all 3 of those guys. I don't think anyone scored higher than 2. It was bad. But Hip and Hammer, he was all right. He took the place of Jack Sorensen at that primary X position last year. He's got okay size and okay speed. I just have a lot of doubts about his ability to convert at the NFL level, but I would not mind seeing him in the spring ball at all. Certainly, and I feel a similar way about Jalen Walker. They were both fairly good receivers for what they were asked to do in that Miami offense, which if you have to watch that Miami offense for any more than 5 minutes, God bless you, because that offense is bad. It's just it's I think I might have said it before, but it's like Northwestern football if it was somehow worse.
Oh God.
That's how that offense operates, and so that really limits the amount of opportunities you have as a receiver. But the fact that they were productive, despite the offense's flaws, gives you a little bit of optimism that they might be able to figure it out given the right fit. I just don't think that fit is the NFL.
What about you, Ryan? You watch them a lot. Do you reckon he might? Do you reckon if not Walker, if Hippenhammer might get a chance on a roster?
No. He's a slot receiver that was basically forced to play outside. Like I say, Sorensen had that big 6'1", 6'2" frame and had like a good 1,200 yard season, like I say, previous year before he declared. And like I say, they kind of just thrust Mac out there. Don't have the profile, speed really, or the size to be an X. So he was kind of just shoehorned there. So the Raz don't really surprise me. Like I said, if you can learn to be a returner or play special teams, but yeah, they'll both.
Yeah, that'll ultimately be the thing for Walker or Hippenhammer. If they can show some type of value in special teams, whether that's as a returner or as a gunner or something to that effect, that's the way they're getting onto a professional roster. Personally, I just don't think that there's enough there between the athletic score and the numbers and their tape to give them a true opportunity in the NFL. Which I don't want that to sound like I'm dumping on them or anything. They were genuinely productive players in the MAC. It's just the reality of the business is ultimately just because you're productive does not mean that you're going to get an opportunity. It's a it's a cutthroat world out there.
Absolutely. You know, a lot of players might end up in the USFL or the XFL before coming back to the league. So it's a route in.
That's why having these spring leagues is really good, is because, you know, you might not have a chance at the NFL, sure, but the XFL's right there, USFL's right there. If you're willing to go to the Great White North and, you know, learn a different code of football, you know, a hip and hammer might actually work out in the CFL because they utilize undersized receivers due to their general code. Go to CFL, you know, and if none of those work out, then I suppose you go to the X League out of Japan, which is one of my favorite leagues to check in on every so often. You can also go to indoor football if you like. There's plenty of opportunities for you in the professional level in football, even if it's not the NFL.
Yeah, absolutely. So one other I want to mention before I go pass it over, see if there's any more that we've missed. But Lou Nichols, we talked about him a lot earlier. I know he's had the really bad season, but could potentially that bad season just put him completely under the radar? I think you said he had a future at the NFL level possibly, but could someone just be getting an incredibly good deal because of the situation he was in, sort of hiding him almost?
Sure. I certainly feel that could be the way that it goes. I don't have a list in front of me necessarily, but I know he's already taken at least 6 visits with NFL teams for the future, and I think I said the Packers were amongst those. I was listening to the Pack-A-Day podcast earlier, and they were going a little bit in depth on his potential fit over there. He's got good size, and he's very young. Like, despite the number of carries that he has at Central, he's got well over 600, I think. At this point, he's only 21 years old. He's a very physical runner. You know, and age in itself is a value at the NFL level. Because, you know, we'll talk about a lot of prospects coming out that are 23, 24, 25. If he was 24 and coming out this year, he does not have value. He is 21 and coming out this year. That gives him a lot of value. I think he'll end up being a priority free agent. Personally, like he's not going to get drafted. Like that's out the window. He's not going to be drafted. That's fine. You know, he's dealing with a hamstring injury right now. No one's going to take that.
And it's a deep class.
But he's certainly worth a flyer in priority free agency, because if you get him at his highest potential, you've got somebody who's able to be a rotational power back, and that will absolutely be of value for several NFL teams out there.
Yeah, agreed. So, is there anyone else that, you know, in terms of the draft prospects? I know when I asked you, you're like, it might be a short list out there, but is there anyone else who we've missed who you want to highlight, who you think might get drafted or is in that priority free agent category? Because I've read all your articles, I've seen you know about everyone in there, so...
I think one guy we missed talking earlier, City Sao.
Yes. That's my bad.
No, that's fine. We've been all over the place today. He's a guy that I would definitely circle if I'm Detroit. I think he's a great scheme fit. 6'4", 323. He has an incredible relative athletic score. He's like a 9.62. Ran a 5.07 40 at 323 pounds, which is immense. He's a big mauler in the run game. That's his strength. He is an excellent run blocker. And that's what we like in our guards. Jonah Jackson and Halapali Vaitai were both known for their run blocking abilities. That's why they were brought in. So, if you get somebody like City Sao at 6'4", 323, who's capable of having an excellent first step, getting in there and mixing it up, I think that's very good. I think he's a little older, but he's got great pedigree. He's first team All MAC 2021, 2022. He has starting experience at tackle, which is a thing to note. That's where he started his true freshman year, was at left tackle. And then he went between left and right guards after that. I think he ended up settling at left, ultimately. But I think he would be okay with moving to the right if it got him a roster spot. That's a guy that I think you can get, again, end of day 2, early day 3. So we're looking at like the 4th to 6th round. I think he'll be available. He was just one of those guys that you saw at the combine and you loved him. I saw a lot of people falling in love with City Sal at the combine. His lateral movement was excellent. His power was great. Showed awesome technique. I think that he would be a great fit, personally, in Detroit. Another guy that we missed, though I don't think it's anyone's fault. It's a very recent rise. Is Joel Wilson, the tight end out of Central Michigan. Somehow, some way, he's gone from a UDFA to a day 3 pick, potentially. Like, we're talking like 6th, 7th round. I believe he stands at about 6'4", 245, something like that. He's very similar in size and probably like athletic build to Shane Zylstra. He's primarily a vertical threat. He's an excellent route runner. That's how he won a lot of his matchups. He was just great at running routes, and he's an interesting case. He's a former high school quarterback from Northern Michigan, from nearby where I used to live, in Petoskey. He redshirted. Then he sat behind Tony Poljan, who was a quarterback to tight end convert, and then Bernhard Reimann, who went from receiver to tight end to offensive line. And then he finally got his opportunity to start in 2021. And he ended up being either the first leading receiver or the second leading receiver in both of those seasons. This year, he led CMU in touchdowns with 6 and placed second in yards with 442 and catches with 42, despite missing 3 games. So they really depended on him being able to get open down the middle of the field and winning contested catches in the red zone to really propel that offense forward this season. He was actually slated to play in the NFLPA Collegiate Bowl before he got called up at the last minute to do the East-West Shrine game. And he had some really good practice sessions in the Collegiate Bowl. People were very impressed with how crisp those routes were. And then the East-West Shrine game, he had a bit of a struggle, but that's understandable because he got there like the day before the game. But he showed the thing that he has to improve on in order to be a valuable prospect ultimately is run blocking. He is very raw at that, which is understandable considering he's only played tight end for the better part of 3 years. But he's shown he's willing to learn. So if you're able to pick him up in the late rounds or even in priority free agency, you can probably develop him to be a relatively good move tight end. Like if he came to Detroit, for instance, he's probably fighting with Shane Zylstra for a spot for that particular build. Like he's not James Mitchell. He's not a primary blocker. He's not Brock Wright, who's just this absolute athletic freak. But, he would have a chance if he got into a room with Zylstra. I do have some other UDFAs as well, if we want to go through those briefly.
Go for it, yeah.
We talked about Lou Nichols already, ad nauseum. Jamal Turner, I know Detroit would express some interest in him as a potential day 3 UDFA tight end. He was asked primarily to be a blocker for Toledo, but he does have a lot of vertical threat potential. He averaged 13 yards a catch, though he didn't have a lot of catches. But when he did have catches, they tended to be very clutch ones. I remember, I think 2022 versus Central this year, that's probably his best tape. He had a career day that day from a receiving prospect. He was also one of the highlight guys at the Hula Bowl as well, alongside his teammate in Deswan Johnson. In terms of just like pure athletic freaks that like you see their RAS scores and you're like, holy crap, I need this guy on my team. Zach Morton, defensive end out of Akron. He scored a 9.31. He has a 35-inch vert, 10'1" broad, 7.073 cone, which is like a 9 out of 10. And he's at 6'4", 261. His comps are Montez Sweat and Peyton Turner, who are both starters at the NFL level. He was part of a rotation of ends at Akron. They rotated in and out quite frequently, so he ended up with 33 tackles and only like a sack. But he also had a pick 6 and has special teams experience, which is how he will land on a roster initially. James Bostic, he didn't have a lot of stats at Ohio. I think he only had 8 catches. but he's a Vanderbilt transfer who is a tweener. He can play wide receiver, he can play H-back, he can play true tight end. He stands at 6'4", currently 233 pounds. He might bulk up for a team, but he runs a 4.56 from that tight end position. He's a 39-inch vert, 11'1" broad with fairly impressive stats all around. He averaged about 20 yards a catch in terms of vertical threat. And then
I was about to say, we were one of the few teams that went to his pro day as well, if I'm right. There are only about 10 teams there, and we were one of them.
Yeah, I believe so. It was a small showing at Ohio, but yeah, Lions have expressed interest, and like we're looking for tight ends, so we're really digging down the bottom of the barrel here. Bostic would be a very intriguing guy. I believe Bostic also went to the Vanderbilt pro day and showed off over there as well. But yeah, Bostic. He's one of those guys. If you bring him in, you can have you kind of want to figure out a position for him quickly. Do you want him to be your X receiver, for instance? Because at 6'4", 233 is an excellent X. Or do you want to put him at tight end and make him more of a vertical threat, like a Shane Zylstra or a Brock Wright, and just get him out there, teach him how to block, get him going on those post routes. And then I guess to another potential X wide receiver, CJ Lewis out of Bowling Green, 6'3", 214 pounds. He has the highest res in Bowling Green history at 9.02. He runs a 4.5 40 with a 38-inch vert. Very limited in terms of statistics. He only played one season at Bowling Green because he transferred in from Boston College, where he didn't get a lot of playing time. Finished 26 receptions, 352 yards, 2 scores. That's another guy that you kind of look at as a camp invitation. Say, let's see what this guy's got, and if we like it, maybe we'll carry him over, to a preseason roster. But there's a pair of Kent State Golden Flashes that really stand out to me in terms of the UDFA market. That's Nico Bolden and Marvin Pierre. They both kind of occupy very similar roles, but for the sake of simplicity, Nico Bolden probably translates to a strong safety at the NFL level, and then Marvin Pierre will probably land himself in the linebacker room. Though Marvin Pierre is kind of a hybrid. He played between strong safety and linebacker, whereas Bolden was more of a true safety who sometimes played linebacker. They're both very athletic. Nico Bolden got a 4.44 in the 40, 2.57 in the 20-yard split. He also has an incredible vert. He jumped 41 inches at pro day, which shows that he's got a lot of explosion. That's at 6'3", 208 pounds. So we're talking big safety. We're talking big run support safety who has speed and explosion in Nico Bolden. He was also extremely productive. He had 103 tackles this past season. 64 of them were solo. And then in 2021, when he transferred over from New Mexico, he had 2 interceptions, 4 passes defense, 2 forced fumbles, fumble recovery. He was just all over the place. Marvin Pierre, he's a little bit smaller. He's 6'1", 222, so he's very undersized for, the kind of linebacker they would probably want him to be, and even for safety to a certain extent. But he has simply elite speed. He also reached 41 inches in the vert as well, and had simply incredible speed splits as well, which you can look up. He finished this season 96 tackles, 7.5 tackles for loss, and 1.5 for sacks, interception, 2 forced fumbles. They really played him all over the place. He showed excellent zone coverage as well. I think I'm struggling to remember which collegiate All-Star Bowl he was in, but I do remember in that game, I think it might have been the Hula Bowl, he showed really good coverage skills from the outside linebacker position, which I think is ultimately where he'll end up slating in the NFL, if he gets there.
Well, there you go. About as in-depth a look into MAC draft prospects as you will get. So keep an eye out for some of those names. Is there anything else you want to ask Rye, sort of about the draft prospects, about the MAC? Anything comes to mind?
Nope, I've got no final questions.
Okay, well, I am aware I've kept everyone on here for quite some time, but it is the last show of the season, so we wanted to have some fun with this. There are a couple of questions I've got, James, if you can indulge a couple more before we finish.
Yeah, of course.
Exactly, lovely. So, Derek Biddleman in the YouTube chat, he goes, is there any wide receiver that could be the next Sky Moore or Corey Davis in the MAC currently?
Currently? I admit I was a little myopic last year on Central's woeful performance, but there are a number of guys. I don't think any of them have a first round grade as of yet. There's no one stat leader, certainly in that respect. Maybe I'll come back around to that one at the end. Do you have another question?
Yeah, there was one other one. This was asked by Ashley, who is one of our panelists on the maybe. It's Ashley Soden. You know who Ash is from the Discord chats, and you probably know the question I'm about to ask you now. But he's a big Florida State fan, and a MAC player has just transferred over there, and he wanted to know if you could tell him a little bit about it. So we're talking about Braden Fisk, who was the Western Michigan DT. He has transferred over to Florida State, and they've had a lot of success with their transfers. I think Jared Verse last year, he came in through the portal from Albany, from the FCS, and they've made him an absolute superstar. What can you tell him about Braden Fisk for next year?
Braden Fisk is really fun. He had a lot of rotational duty behind Ali Fayad, and then what's his name? It's Andre Carter back there for a while as well, and showed himself to be an excellent power guy, which is what they ask of their defensive ends and defensive tackles over there. I don't have the stats in front of me right now, but he will be a very good relief piece for a Jared Verse when he gets over there. It was a big loss to their defensive room for him to leave Florida State, and an unexpected loss as well.
So is he another one of those guys who plays all over the line?
I think he has the capability of doing so. I think they primarily played him at defensive end. However,
okay. All right, no, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, that's everything I've got. There was just a couple of questions at the end there. So
sorry, I did mean to come back to that question.
Yeah, go for it.
I didn't want to make a mistake.
No,
not to be honest and fair. But there are a couple receivers that I think that you should keep an eye on upcoming this season. The big one for me, Alex Adams out of Akron. He's a former LSU Tiger. He started the season really slow. This year, he only had like a handful of receptions maybe in the first half of the season, but he really came alive in MAC play. He finished the year with 850 yards and 9 touchdowns, a lot of those being like really contested red zone shots as the main target over there. Like at the start of the year was Shockey Jacques Louis, the former Pittsburgh Panther, who was expected to be the leading receiver there, but by the end of the year, that was Alex Adams' team. Like it was just clear from the start.
I forgot he was there. He was like the big receiver at not the returner, wasn't he? He was like a big returner there.
Yeah, it was just a bit of surprise. Like Shockey Jacques Louis still put up a lot of good numbers. He finished as the leading receiver, 74 receptions, 936 yards, but he just couldn't get into the end zone. And that was his major undoing. Whereas Adams was getting in there constantly by the end of the season. Another guy to look at there, Sam Wiglusz. I believe Sam Wiglusz comes back for Ohio. That's if we're talking about, the Levante Bellamy or the Dwayne Eskridge kind of like slot guy with a lot of speed and good hands, that's your guy. Former Ohio State receiver. They played him all over the field, slot outside, and had good numbers to back that up. 11 touchdowns on 73 receptions, so he was scoring once every 7 catches. Essentially, just an absolute matchup nightmare on that front. Dylan I think Drummond's transferring, so never mind on that. But yeah, there's a handful of guys out there. Justin Tucker and Kean Williams, they're both from Buffalo. They might find themselves a place as UDFAs and make good for MAC wide receivers out there. I'm struggling to remember Odiu Hilaire from Bowling Green. I think he's still on that roster this year, but he really had a showing out after transferring from Alabama A&M. He finished with 6 touchdowns, 747 yards, 58 as their primary receiver. He really came on and impressed me last year. I think if he has another season like that, he'll do very well.
Oh, excellent. Hopefully that answers your question there, Derek. Right, that is just about everything I have. Thank you ever so much for today, James. I appreciate this. I know I've kept you a while, but we just love to talk. So, especially trying to learn about the...
I'm happy to talk all day, man.
Yeah.
It's something I love to do is talk about football, talk about MAC football, talk about Lions football, too.
Exactly. Well, look, trying to learn about the G5 leagues, it does help as well because it's harder to come across. So it's been good to have someone who knows a lot about what they're talking about here. So, no, I appreciate it. Just before we finish, I want to give you a chance. Just push Hustle Belt again. I use it. It's a great website if you want to learn more about MAC football, the draft prospects for this year. There is articles about them all. Go check it out. But James, you please feel free to push it before we go.
All right, we're currently in the process of finishing up our NFL draft prospect profiles, which takes all the measurements, pro day numbers, and relative athletic scores for all the MAC prospects coming out this year. It puts them in one nice little convenient place. I believe we are putting out another one. We are actually, I had to put it out while we were on the podcast, but we'll have more of those scheduled. I think we're through 8 of 12. We'll also have some individual draft prospects. I think Jamal Turner's deep dive is coming out here really soon. I need to check in with my writer Steve about that. And I might end up doing a Joel Wilson one too, since now he's starting to get into the depths of the draft. But you can find us at hustlebelt.com, HUSTLEBELT.com. Also the same on Twitter, at hustlebelt, HUSTLEBELT. We will be sure to track all of the draft news you could possibly need. We're usually very good at the UDFA draft tracker. We also track the 53-man rosters when those are coming out. So, yeah. If you need anything MAC football related, MAC football especially, we do also get into MAC basketball a little bit when that's in season, and we do some other spring sports, but football is really our big specialty. Anything MAC football that you might need, please go find it at that website. Join us in the beer garden, where we have weekly beer reviews on Fridays at 5. Our guy Dave Drury is really good at doing that. And hopefully we'll have our podcast back up. It's been on hiatus for a while. But we're doing our best out here. And thank you for having me on. I've been a enjoyer of you guys for probably, I think I started listening in the preseason of last year. And I've been on the Discord for about as long. So it's been a literal year in making for this moment to happen.
It has, and some of that's on me, and I apologize. I meant to do this for the whole MAC preview, but I hope you will come on again during the summer when we do the MAC preview for 2023, because your information will be valuable, because we like to try and set the stall out for the season, let people know about the leagues, players to watch, stuff like that, try and make it as easy as possible. So
right.
we'd love to...
I would have hit on it today, but rosters are still a little bit in flux, so I'd like to sit around and wait a little bit.
Exactly. We'll do them during the summer. That'll be the next thing we do. We're taking a break now from the college stuff because it's a bit in flux now. So we're going to wait, let it settle, start the league reviews in the summer. We start with the G5. So hopefully you'll come back on and you'll be able to let us know a bit more about 2023 as well. So, yeah, thank you ever so much. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who's joined us this evening. Appreciate all your questions, all your comments in there.
Yeah, thanks, y'all.
Yeah, on Twitch and YouTube. Next shows you are going to find on Monday. It is our last pre-draft show before next Thursday, and the draft begins, and Brad Holmes continues cooking. So please do come and join us. We're just going to be doing a Q&A, going to have sort of a lazy stream where we just kind of chat with you guys more than do anything per se. And then on the Wednesday, we're going to do a very fun wager show where we're going to have some draft wagers, and maybe some of us have to do embarrassing forfeits if we lose, etc. It's going to be good fun, so check us out for that. As for the college football podcast, this is the end of season 2. Thank you to everyone who has watched us through the first 2 seasons. When me and Ryan first started doing this, we got like 2 people watching us a week. Now we have a lot more. We really appreciate you backing this. We're going to take a break now, as we said, because there's not really a lot going on at the minute, so I'm going to be prepping up the league previews for next year. They take a long time to do, so when we're ready with that, we will be back for season 3. We will be going through all those, and we will be getting you up to date on the college scene for 2023. So that'll be about a month or 2 away from now. So keep an eye out on all our socials, our Twitter, our Instagram, all that, and you'll be aware of when we're back as soon as we announce it. So yeah, we will see you then, but you'll see me around. You'll see me everywhere. See me on the main pod. In terms of our socials, you can find us everywhere. YouTube, Roar of the Lions UK, Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, ROTL_UK. Our Facebook page is Roar of the Lions UK, and our group is Detroit Lions Fans UK, One Pride Worldwide, and our website, www.roarofthelionsuk.com. So you can find us pretty much anywhere you want to if you wish. Just remains for me again to thank James for this evening. Reminds me to thank Ryan as well. Ryan's had to go and give Hank a walk because we have been going on quite a while. So Hank is out having the time of his life on walk at the minute, and we shall see you again very soon for the draft, and I absolutely cannot wait. So have a great weekend all, and we shall see you again soon. Just remains for me to say, One Pride.